20 million active players, which is incredibly 10 times more than the actual number of historical Vikings. Finally, there's a game that is a perfect mix of 3D graphics and smooth gameplay. This is the first strategy RPG with the detailed open world of the Vikings. The massive online battles of the game will get you hooked after 5 minutes of playing. So don't waste time, support our channel by installing Vikings right now using the links below, and you will get 200 gold, a protection shield, and your place in Valhalla for free. Since the establishment of Islam in Arabia, the Caliphate fought continuous wars of conquest across many regions, but the main brunt of its initial advances was focused on the Byzantine Empire. Historiography often considers the Battle of Tours in 732 to be a turning point in the wars between the Christians and Muslims. But the campaign in France pales in comparison to the Siege of Constantinople of 717 to 718. As it was here, the Byzantines and their Bulgar allies faced the main Umayyad force. Following the success at Yarmouk in 636, the Rashidun Caliphate quickly took control over Syria. Jerusalem was captured a year later, and by 642, Egypt was under Muslim control. While the conquest of North Africa continued, other Arab armies were fighting against the Sassanid Empire and completely subjugated it by the early 650s. As the Caucasus were also vassalized or conquered in this period, a tentative border between the Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire formed on the eastern edges of Anatolia. Striking deep into Anatolia was problematic, as the supply lines were overstretched. So the Caliphate built its first navy in Syria and Egypt.
So I guess that's a little bit better. You don't hear it double. But I was trying to think of a battle that is like completely applicable. And I don't know if this is exactly the best one. I was thinking maybe the siege of Syracuse or the siege of Rhodes during the Diadochi. There's a lot of siege of Rhodes and everything. When they built the Colossus at Rhodes, that was part of that. But I think this one is really good because it shows how deep the what do you call it? How close it was early on, and it was one of the first sieges. I just want to make sure I get this empire correct. I know it's an Arab empire, but
reached him in 656, and he returned to Syria.
And they keep changing. Is it Umads? Is it Caliphate? Okay, so when the Caliphate pushed in deep to the Byzantines, and they overextended, and there's a lot of things that happened in there. I think going back and forth. So it wasn't a straightforward thing. No battle really is if you look at it, right? So, but they definitely were surrounded, and they had to be resupplied, and I think that's the key point of the one. At least when I think back, I like this siege or whatever. I mean, there's other sieges. There's sieges in Middle Ages I really like in Flanders. I'll probably show one of them, but I think this is more towards the Caucasus. I mean, more towards it's on the Black Sea, obviously, so people relate to it a little bit better.
With some sources claiming that the capital of the empire was under a constant siege, while others insist that it was just a series of raids. But we know that the Byzantines used Greek fire for the first time to destroy the Arab fleet. In 678, the Byzantines managed to land a small force in Syria, and that sparked a revolt by the local Christians. That forced the Caliphate to sign a peace treaty and pay a symbolic amount in reparations in 679. Meanwhile, a war in the Caspian steppes was raging between the Bulgars and the Khazars, and the former had to migrate. The Bulgars were led by Aspura Khan. They settled around the Danube River sometime between 674 and 678. But now that the eastern border was secured, Emperor Constantine IV assembled a strong force and marched to meet these new invaders. The Bulgars took a defensive position in a place called Ongal in the Danube Delta, and a siege began. After 3 days, the emperor boarded a ship and left his army, most probably to attend the 6th Ecumenical Council in his capital. Seeing that, some of the troops decided to abandon the siege. Aspera used this opportunity and charged out against the Byzantine forces, who began to rout. The Bulgar horsemen rode them down all the way to Odessos, modern-day Varna. The Byzantine losses were heavy, and the following year they signed a peace treaty which guaranteed the borders of Bulgaria and agreed to pay yearly tribute to the nomads who were here to stay. Constantine was succeeded by Justinian II in 685. Justinian was very ambitious and wanted to live up to his name. In 687, he led successful campaigns against the Bulgars and the Slavs. He signed a new treaty with the Caliphate, according to which Armenia, Iberia, and Cyprus were now in joint possession. However, in 692, he attacked the Muslims again and was soundly defeated at Sebastopolis in Cilicia. In 695, Justinian was deposed, and a period known as the 20 Years' Anarchy began. 6 emperors ruled during this period, and the Caliphate used this time to take over North Africa and Spain. The Arabs were making inroads into Anatolia, and it was clear that Constantinople would be next. Emperor Theodosius III was aware of this danger, and in 760...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. What happens in Burma or Myanmar? Like, there's so many like civil wars that China could just waltz right in, and they're all small armies. And China could go right for Tokyo, led over into North Korea, push down to Seoul. And that's my thinking. You know, as it's like I mean, we look at the Chinese like they're super arrogant, man.
16 signed an alliance with the Bulgarian Khan Tervel and prepared to defend his capital, stockpiling food and ordering any family who couldn't acquire enough food to last for 3 years to evacuate the city. In 717, the Arabian forces were besieging the city of Amorium. At the same time, the strategos of the Anatolic theme, Leo, rebelled against the emperor. The Muslims tried to take advantage of the situation and negotiated with him. Leo convinced them to pull their forces back, promising that he would be their ally once he secured the throne.
Oh, I see. There's black.
Theodosius was not willing to start yet another civil war and announced his resignation. Leo III peacefully took the throne and immediately broke his promise to the Umayyads. Caliph Solomon ordered his brother, Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, to lead 80,000 men and 800 ships to take Constantinople. Meanwhile, Leo III began his preparations. Envoys were sent to the Bulgars asking for help, and the city's fortifications were improved. The Arab forces took Abydos in July of 717 and were ferried across the Hellespont. They erected 2 walls by August, one facing the city and one defending their camp from the west. The Byzantine capital was defended by the Theodosian walls, built in the early 5th century, 12 meters high and 4 meters.
The Theodosian War is like something very, I don't know, something that's very intriguing to me. It's like one of the first type of castle type of structures, defensive structures, and it is one of the last ones to ever fall. Excuse me. And what brought it down was actually cannons. So it's one of the first ones made. and the last one to fall. It's remarkable for the period of 1,000 years, because they were built off those precepts. I had to sneeze. Sorry about that. Let me mute it.
By the Theodosian walls, built in the early 5th century. 12 meters high and 4 meters deep, they were considered impregnable. The sea walls, built much later, however, were significantly weaker. The walls were guarded by a 12,000-strong garrison, and the city had huge reserves of food. The best hope to take Constantinople was from the sea. The Arab fleet attempted to pass through the Bosphorus to encircle the city. Warships were at the front, with supply ships behind them and troop transports at the back. The heavy transports lagged behind, and as soon as a gap formed, Leo deployed his ships, and their Greek fire destroyed part of the transport group. Only 20 ships were sunk or burned, but this event decreased the morale of the Arabs. The Umayyad navy was successful in blockading the city, but there was no assault, as it was hard to convince any sailor to engage the Byzantine fleet after what they just saw. Still, communications between Constantinople and the Black Sea were disrupted, and the Arabs besieged Galata. Meanwhile, a chain was drawn between the city and Galata in order to prevent the Muslim fleet from entering the Golden Horn. The 50th
second. They got an artist representation of it. Chain across images. Well, they got pieces of it. But this is, it would have a chain. Across Galata and Constantinople, right here. Oops. I guess this is a picture of it. Oh, it's really teeny. So it was stored whenever they needed, for probably for hundreds of years. And it was floated on barrels. Across, and so when a warship hit it, it would get stopped by that chain, and then it would be and they could hit it with other kind of siege equipment and everything, and just prevent it from attacking, and other ships will go out to meet it. So this is, I know this happened in the siege that's about to happen. No. This happened in when they finally fell in the 1450s, and this is where the chain is right here. So yeah, it was floated right here. Okay, it was above the water, and it would just hit a ship, and then there's the whole entire thing would be reinforced. I know, Viking, what's his name, was able to get over. He was in a smaller ship, not Newt, but the Varangians were really Kevin Roos. Were Swedish, um, Estonians, Latvians, and Kevin Roos. That kind of thing. Was it more interrelated back then because they're like more tribals, uh, commonalities. But hold on, what's his name? I don't think I have the no. Was it Harold? Yeah, it was Harold. He was the most famous, one of the most famous Vikings. I don't know. I'm only like Spigeon Swedish, so it's not like I know too much about it. But I know when he stayed in Constantinople for he stayed in Constantinople. Oh my god. Do paste. Sorry about that. Any kind of imperfection, you can just move back. You won't know. You just won't know. Like out here, perfectly fine. Out here, you'll see like my fucking pores and shit. So, but anyway, so he stayed there. He came down with a contingent of his bodyguard, because he made a play for the Swedish throne, didn't work out. So he got his loyalists, his clan, head over to I think Finland. When something in Lithuania, Latvia, when Latvia came down, down to Kiev, knew that he was a mercenary down there, made some money, and he said, "Oh, you can make more money in Milogard." No, and that was Constantinople. So he went down there, stayed there for 10 years, built up his money. Long story short, short story long, on the Golden Horn, shit was going crazy, you know, people killing everybody, emperors, and he was in the middle of all that shit, and he had to get out of Dodge, you know, and so he took what he had at the time, you know, was left of his guard or whatever, and his loot, filled it in two ships, rolled across the chain, um, but one of the ships was just laden down with so much gold and loot, it sunk, so they had to get on top of his ship. But he still had a lot of gold, and they just like was able to force the way over. But it was a smaller Viking ship, you know what I'm saying? But point being is that chain historically it could absorb force, and it's always good. I mean, so when a tank comes in, it's just gonna all that, you know, because of the water itself, you know, it acts as the resistance, so the buoys and everything. So you're forcing all that water forward, and it absorbs that force, and the ships won't break. So you think, is this that chain, or it's just that hedgehog? But if you chain them all together and lash them all together with cables, boom, done. You know what I'm talking about? And so because you're trying to make them single file, but the rate they're destroying them, it's nuts. It's crazy. It's like, oh my god, are they even gonna get to the headshot? Well, they're gonna. Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not making affirmations about anything. You know, and, you know what they say about assuming you make an ass out of you and me, and here I am talking about are they gonna go to Königsberg? Yeah, but it's probably gonna go to Warsaw. You know, the thing with the insurgency and kill squads and elimination squads that's still like active, and it's all lawless. Like, who the fuck knows? It's just mayhem, you know what I mean? Like, how the fuck do I know? You know what I'm talking about? It's just like, I'm just looking at this shit, I'm like, fuck, it's just the Wild West and shit, you know, with javelins and stingers, oh my, everything else, oh my, right, and death. But fuck, you know, I'm saying shit, I don't know, man. But that's just how it is. If you give a 14-year-old kid a gun, and as soon as he thinks anything out of the ordinary, I mean, so I mean, you're coming in there as a foreigner. I mean, it's like, are you gonna say that I'm Indian? No, I'm even out here where it's barely America, where you don't even have America culture per se, and it's mostly Chinese. Like they're hesitant. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, even if they're hit with the truth, they're just like, okay, no, we could hide behind like the Chinese perception of what I am. You know, so it's just like, you go out there into a foreign country, man. Even the press is being shut out. Is that counterinsurgency? I don't fucking know, man. You know what I'm talking about? It's just like, it's nuts. But that being said, if they're counterinsurgent, if they're insurgencing Ukraine with non-military forces, whatever, we gotta counterinsurgent Russia and pull up like train tracks, you know, before they figure out we don't have enough rations, we don't have enough ammo, we don't have enough fuel and shit like that. I mean, are they gonna figure out the logistical issues? I don't know. Are they gonna try? Definitely. Before they try, be one step ahead of them. You know, I'm talking, be two steps ahead of them. You know what I'm saying? Fuck that. It's like, not only destroying you here, not only going to destroy you from the sides and get those fuel checks. Before those fuel checks even get there, we'll destroy the shit on the train. I mean, we'll destroy the train tracks, you know. Not the train, but just rip apart the train track, like the Civil War. Get a bunch of coal, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like when you're barbecuing and shit, get a bunch of bags, just lay it down on the tracks, light it up. Then you just get a car, tow it, rip it right off to the side. No one's around. They can't guard all that shit. If you want to protest the war, protest the war. But if you really want to do damage or whatever, boom, do that. You know what I'm saying? Stop it. Because the less, if you can get shit to trickle in to Ukraine, that means it's more manageable. You know what I'm talking about? So he's like, well, it's going to get there eventually. Well, yeah. But the thing is, it's not handling in force. You know, you're not handling 100 tanks at once. You're handling one. You could deal with that shit. You know, no one wants to deal with a fucking tank. No one wants to deal with a huge fucking HE round coming in your face. No one. I'm pretty sure no one does. You know what I'm saying? Maybe a little bit over there, but not in your face. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyways, So you want to handle it one at a time or manageable, so you slow it down, say before they could do it en masse. Because, anyways, that's my point. Anyways, I am going off on a tangent. Let's go back to this video.
Horn. The fifth Galata. Meanwhile, a chain was drawn between the city and Galata in order to prevent the Muslim fleet after what they just saw. Still, communications between Constantinople and the Black Sea were disrupted, and the Arabs besieged Galata. Meanwhile, a chain was drawn between the city and Galata in order to prevent the Muslim fleet from entering the Golden Horn. The 15,000 Bulgar troops of Turvo started appearing in the vicinity of the city in the autumn of 717. It is said that a 4,000-strong Arab foraging party was ambushed and destroyed by the Bulgars. The Muslim forces still vastly outnumbered the defenders, but now most of their troops were between two enemy forces. The winter was harsh, and the Arabs, used to a completely different climate, began to starve and die. Diseases ravaged their camps, and yet the siege continued. The situation of Maslama's forces seemingly was going to improve in the spring, as the Caliph sent 20,000 warriors and a few hundred vessels carrying supplies to reinforce the siege. However, these ships were manned by Christian traders, since all the available Muslim sailors were already on the first fleet. Many ships, along with their crews, joined the defenders. They also brought valuable reports on the Arab blockade. Leo used this information to destroy the northern portion of the Arab fleet using Greek fire. The Muslim reinforcements were attacked by the Byzantine forces in Anatolia, and Leo, who now controlled the northern portion of the strait, managed to land a small force behind them. All 20,000 of the reinforcements were killed. All that caused an even bigger loss of morale. 15,000 Arabs attempted to move to the southwest to cross the Hellespont back to Asia, but were caught by Turvo and massacred. In August of 718, Maslama received a letter from the Caliph ordering him to lift the siege. 13 months after the beginning of the siege, the Arabs began their retreat. The Bulgars used the fact that no one was manning the outer walls to attack them from behind, and anywhere between 20 and 30,000 Arabs were killed. The rest, some 30,000, managed to make it back to Tarsus, while the vast majority of the navy was sunk by a storm and by the Byzantine navies harassing them along the way. The historical impact of this siege can't be overstated. The Arabs suffered their first massive defeat in the war against the Byzantines. Their road to Central and Eastern Europe was closed, and they never again attempted to take Constantinople. The Umayyads lost prestige and their best fighters, which allowed the Abbasids to overthrow them 3 decades later. The Muslim world was divided, not to be united again. Thank you for watching our video on the Siege of Constantinople. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters
with
who
Muslim
make the
history,
creation.
particularly Spain. I'm knowledgeable about. I don't like to get into depth about certain things. People get really antsy about it or whatever. But I don't want to have all these corrections constantly. They say something and then something happens, and and I want to be focused on all the corrections, whatever. But who took over the Umayyads war actually? This is still like the 700s. Were the Muslims in the Carthage region, and those were actually descended from the Vandals, right? So they were more free thinking. So that thought was able to take over, move actually from the Berber Vandal area over to Egypt and Mesopotamia. So they moved up. All the best fighters and leaders got killed in Constantinople and that siege. And 30 years later, that was. I mean, it's that interesting dynamic or whatever. So, and so it's funny because I had a Greek friend and he would always, he had like Turkish friends or whatever. And it's just, both of them kind of odd to me or whatever because they're like Orthodox and stuff like that. And, and he'd try to fuck with me and I'll be like, no, I'm native and everything, And, and he'd be like, well, this Turkish and Greek are always at war, but they're NATO. And I was like, that's kind of weird, right? But I was like, you keep saying you're different from being Turkish or whatever, but you're Greek. You're basically the same fucking people. You know what I mean? You literally are. I mean, so why you keep saying these Turkish people are different from you? Now keep fucking with them, man. I was like, you're the same fucking people. Why are you at war? Your people was in Ionia. The great best Greek scholars were all the fucking Persia building fucking temples and shit. You got the best Persian shit in Greece, whatever. The same fucking culture. Why are you at war? What is the fucking sin? What do you have against each other? You know what I'm talking about? You're just trying to make yourselves different. It makes no fucking sense. You just want some line and whatever and be like, oh, I'm different from you when you're same fucking people, whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's just like whatever. So, but I just saw somebody delivering me for like 10 minutes and it was just all awkward because I was about to get in it with him. I was like, why do you think you're different from this guy? It's ridiculous. We're all like one people, but I don't know. Let's make these divides and shit. We got to say we're better than somebody. And we got to convince we're better than somebody. That's all it is. It's just a bullshit facade. Smoke and mirrors that we're better than everybody. Or this person's worse than us. But I love that because they're overextended. I like Belisarius, by the way. He's my favorite general. Anyway, so the Arabs were overextended, the Umans were overextended, and they had a nice siege already set up in Constantinople, the Theodosian walls. They were able to get resupplied constantly. There's probably better ones more into that siege or whatever, well documented in the siege. And you have this dynamic too, how some of the vassals of the Arabs defected over to Constantinople, some of the Latin states and everything. Oh, okay, was it Latins? Oh, that's later on. But so you have these Russian speakers now saying, "What the fuck?" Saying this does nobody any good. Talking about, so how do we make this shit end as quick as possible? How do we stop having the best of what Russian has to order? Because who do you recruit into your military? The best. I'm going to say you have filters to get the best, right? So they're sending the best of Russia has to die in Ukraine. And those are going to build the economy and everything else like that. And it's just nuts. I mean, they were going to build the economy because they have that risk taking that, because they're more attuned to like state bureaucratics and connected like that, so they know where to go and these connections, whatever, and they have just a little bit more drive than the average person on average, right? So that's eradicated. It's annihilated. It's going to be annihilated in Ukraine. So they're like, well, the best of what Russia has been annihilated, and it's going to continue to be annihilated. So there's a lot of Russians are out there being like, well, how do we end this shit quickly? So you have that dynamic. And I'm saying ripping up, slowing down what's happening any way you can, so they can handle it one at a time. Let me go cut this. I got this on sale, and then it got on sale again, That's usually typical. Buy something, and then the next version comes out as soon as I buy it. Or goes on sale. Anything green looks good on me. Skin color, I'm telling you. Authentic Hanano. I remember living in Tahiti, in the Hanano store or whatever, and I get my clothes over there back in the day. And I was just like telling my second wife at the time, um, trying to get the deals and everything. They're always like hustling. And I was like, oh, can you? Because it's always expensive, right? It's like, let's see if we get a deal over here. And then she comes back at me. And it's like $5 off or whatever. And then that's it. And she comes at me. And she's like, the deal is that you could get it. You know what I'm talking about? This shit sells out. Is that we will have whatever it is that you want. That's the deal. You know what I mean? I was like, fuck it. Even at Tahiti, it's hard to get Hinano. It's hard to get. It's still. I mean, it's like, what the fuck? I mean, that's just how it's good quality, and it's like in the heat, it still keeps you it doesn't like cling to you like polyester or whatever. So it's one of the best quality mid-range Aloha shirts, Hinano. I mean, there's higher quality. I do have, but I have a few of them. I only have. Yeah, I'm not gonna get into that. But anyways, Hinano. I highly recommend it. It does help out Tahitian people. Um, and the French are very protective of them. I like that. That's what our government needs to go into. What is it? The French preservation of culture, whatever the hell they call it over there. And there's like a subdivision, like museums and all the art they treat and all that other stuff. They preserve it, and you can't do this or that. The architecture, preservation of architecture and everything, and then a small section of that for Tahiti, for little pie section of that is for indigenous cultures, and it's really defined. And it's funny, like once they knew I was like Native American, there's like different layers of that. Like, oh, okay, so they're really like very protective, and I like that. So we could learn from them. It's historically whatever. I mean, no one, you don't talk if they have really a lot of good elements in there. So we're a young country. We're only 200 years old, so our architecture is like 200. I mean, if I had $1 billion, if I had like trillions of dollars, you know what I would do? I'll tell you right now what I would do. The Washington Monument. We couldn't afford to give over the Washington Monument. We couldn't afford to build a little pillar. We just had a little stump for like a long time, and then finally we had enough after the Civil War. But it was never supposed to be just a pillar. It was supposed to be this whole rotunda, beautiful marble and everything else like that. If I had $1 billion, that's what I'd do. I'd finish it. I would. You have to push it through all the legal red tape, and I'm like, man, get the fuck out of my face with all that shit. This original plan. This is meant to be done. Some dumb motherfucker wants to start a war. Let's get this shit done, so we could have some kind of shit. So we could be like, hey, instead of some wooden structures that deteriorate, hey, this is where Abraham Lincoln, and we're like pumping it full of fucking shit, so it doesn't like fucking the wood doesn't fucking crumble on us and shit like that, So we don't have ancient structures, yeah. And of course, Notre Dame burnt down or whatever, but that's not what we got to do now. We gotta like put in cameras, right? And like scan it, like all the like lasers, and get every like square millimeter of it, and massive polygonic, type of things, whatever, and say it's okay to have artists that know this building and know how to reproduce that in the way they had to do it. I'm talking about. And so not only do you know that, but now you go into your skill. So you're an artist, right? But your core is knowing what is already made. I'm talking about. So just in case that happens, you could already do it, and it's okay to add on to it in the style that it was. So you don't want to have this hodgepodge of art on top of on the cathedral. So like the Templar Cathedral up in England, right? Oh, what is that? that rose or whatever the fuck it is. You see how it's already, weather beaten or whatever. People want to be like, keep it as it is. But I think, to me, I have a very different, I wouldn't say it's outlier, but I think if someone was free to think in a perfect world with a lot of resources, unlimited resources, we had this artist be like, okay, I could identify that art. I could reproduce that. Now I could do block by block and rebuild it. You know what I'm talking about? And with that specific type of from that quarry as much as possible in that style, you could get it to where it was, and you could even make it better. So you just want to make it what it was, so you reproduce it. You know what I'm talking about? So that's how I feel about it. I ain't gonna, trust me, I get shot down every time I talk about my theories or whatever about preservation of art, whatever. But people was like, okay, just keep it real. That because that's who made it, that's who want it. You don't want to touch it or whatever, right? So you just have those ruins found. I'm not that guy. But then again, if you try to, rebuild it, people was like, well, that's not exactly how it was. But there's a way to do it. It takes a lot more resources, money, and it always comes down to money. And people want to use it, and then you use a building and put wires in it. They have lights and everything, so you gotta balance it. Like in Venice and everything. So, but there's always a way. Sell one building, and you move on to the next. So if I had if I had $1 trillion, if I was Putin, that's what I would do. Make it so we have something and something that's everlasting, because that's your monument too. So you live forever. Stone lives forever, man. Wood, though. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, what is another siege while I get all my maps up? A good siege. General. This guy. I don't know where he's from. I think he's got to be Polish or something like that. That doesn't matter. I'll just go to this channel. Type in siege. I'll show you what I'm doing. Then. Okay, I'll just show you super quickly what I was talking about. Original. Plans for the Washington Wash. This is absolutely phenomenal. Getting like the best. Look how beautiful this is. Oops. Civil War saga. Oh, here's a good one. Just enlarge it. So that's what it was supposed to be. This huge colonnade over here. And then you have like this hippodrome type of cherry thing up here. But then I was getting into even like deeper thought into it. I was like, how do you preserve it? You know, I'm talking about, I was like, shit. Then you could have like getting all fantastic, you know, sci-fi and stuff like that. You don't know how deep the bedrock is, right? If something happens, like nuclear war or something like that, that you could just sink it on hydraulics, right? And just have like dome cover it. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, like how like yeah, the Constitution, it just goes in a secure place. It drops into wherever it does, you know, that kind of thing. So that'd be super sci-fi, you know. Do that, and so you always preserve it, and like, you just hydraulic it the fucker back up, you know. So unless you have a direct hit. No. Shit you think about. I'm trying to think of a siege that's sort of the same. This is on a river. It's more they flooded stuff, you know. Oh no, I'd like this. This was always interesting to me.
From the 14th to the 17th century, siege warfare became ever more important in Central Europe. Engineers and tacticians developed fortresses that were more elaborate and more solid than ever before. As a result, siege warfare reached an immense level of complexity. Throughout the Middle Ages, high and relatively thin walls were enough to protect against storming ladders, siege equipment, and projectiles. But since the 14th century, ever more effective firearms and artillery challenged the defensive potential of fortresses. A to and fro of military innovation began. Improved fortifications countered improved gunpowder weapons and vice versa. This went on until the end of the 16th century, when, according to Stefan Hoppe, quote, a successful solution to all important issues of defense had been found, end quote. One famous type of stronghold that was crucial to this evolution was the Trace Italienne, better known as Star Fortress. It was to be found quickly all over Europe, though in a variety of forms. Historian John A. Lynn states that at the same time the numbers of fortified sites increased drastically, so that Central European warfare shifted away from open field battles and finally revolved above all around sieges. During this time period, sieges differed greatly from case to case, just as the besieged cities themselves differed. The complexity of this subject necessitates simplification. This requires us to apply a technique that historians use frequently. This technique is known as ideal type, and it is based on the works of the great German sociologist Max Weber. This is to say, we will not look at every individual siege. Instead, we take recurring elements from different sieges to construct a typical and ideal siege that we then use to explain the most important and most common tactics of siege warfare. Modern-day historiography explains the complex nature of siege warfare as follows. The backbone of the defense on polygonal fortresses were the bastions. A bastion had two faces that could accommodate several pieces of artillery, with which approaching enemies could be shot at from a great distance. The shoulders were built as depicted here to fire at the shoulder of the next bastion, or along the piece of wall in between two bastions, known as the curtain. This was to make sure there were no blind spots in the defense. Yet the most essential strength of a fortress were the relatively low and thick walls. They were supported with earth that could withstand heavy artillery fire for a long time, a quality direly needed in the early modern period. A ditch, sometimes filled with water, prevented attackers from attempting to take the stronghold by storm. Ravelins, V-shaped outworks, protected the curtains from direct fire. It was only after around 1600 that sometimes further outworks were added. At the bottom of the wall, there was a berm, a small alleyway. The covered way was a path which continued along the outer edges of the ditch and provided an advanced defensive position. It was covered by the glacis, a parapet of a man's height, which on one hand covered the man fighting on the covered way from enemy fire, but on the other hand, and much more importantly, matched in angle with the top of the wall, so that an attacker could only fire at the wall from far away, which was much less effective. Therefore, the enemy was forced to take the glacis before he could attempt to breach the walls. Attacking such a fortress was very expensive. It required a lot of manpower and an enormous amount of time. The siege of Candia, to name but one extreme example.
So that's what I was thinking about. Kyiv, you know, you're gonna have to sacrifice, you know, some infrastructure. But I guess maybe there's so much rubble you don't have to do that actually. To tell you the truth. Now that I think about it, seeing the pictures of Kyiv, use it as a quarry, and you push out those defenses as far out from the city as possible. So you keep pushing out your defenses and slowing them down. So they don't get to your supplies, your other, you know, your main defenses. Destroy men, material of the city, you know, stuff that matters to you.
Lasted from 1648 to 1669, that is 21 years.
Or preserve.
According to historian John A. Lane, a determined siege almost always resulted in the fall of the fortress. But the strategical value of a fortress was not that it was invulnerable. Its value was in the high price the enemy had to pay in money, manpower, and time to capture it. Because of this, rather creative and sometimes unconventional ways to get hold of a fortress were preferred. The most simple method was just to threaten a siege or direct attack. In many cases, the mere sight of an army alongside a guarantee of safe conduct was enough to get the defender to surrender. If it did not, as
See, that's not what's happening here, though. You'll be tricked into safe conduct. You won't get deported and all this other stuff. Hey, what's up, Tanks? How you doing? 806? Oh, that was 20 minutes ago. So you'll be tricked into getting safe conduct, and then, you know, you get fired upon. So whatever it is to just jar it up, just to lessen the fight a little bit, to fuck with your mentality. Oh, give it up, or okay, this, that, and whatever else, should do it right back on them. How about you give up, you motherfuckers? So I would say, I remember like in times of East, this big Irish redhead, he was caught in the bathroom by a bunch of Italians, and they told him to run his pockets. It was like 3 or 4 of them. I was like, and I, smaller guy. I was like, I looked at him. I was like, I think I'm probably sad. I was like, look, just look at him, tell him, no, you run your pockets. And he's like, he looked at him. I was like, I don't even care if you want their money. I don't care if you think you could win. You want to prevent what's happening, you need to say that to them. You know what I'm talking about? You need to have those words come out your mouth. It's the safest thing to do. He was no one ever tried to fuck with me again, you know what I mean? But the thing is, when you're that big, people really had to fight. People my size always had to fight. No, I didn't walk in a room and people didn't back down. You know what I mean? I had to do something quickly. Big people tend to never have to fight or whatever. They say a few things and you just right on top of them. Bam! You know what I'm talking about? It's like before they even react, They sit down, you throw them over the chair while they're sitting down, start stomping them, until you fat fuck, that kind of thing. And so you have this small 120-pound guy taking down 200-300-pound dude, whatever, that just like, because they never fight. You know what I'm saying? They get in one fight here, maybe another fight there, and you're there every hour, fighting, nonstop. You know what I'm talking about? And people like, and they all jump for joy. Oh, we brought Supreme down or whatever. Yeah, that was an hour or two ago, whatever. I'm back up. What's up? You know what I'm talking about? So, constant thing, 80-90% win. You know what I'm talking about? So, but it's just like this constantly, nonstop. So you don't have a choice. You know what I'm talking about? People born, but I'm better than you, so I'm going to go after him. And people are like, oh, well, you look for trouble, it's going to find you. I was like, I didn't look for trouble. I dealt with shit that came in there, and if I saw someone about to do something, I would instantly do something about it. But that was a long time ago before I went in the Marine Corps. And you give up that, how you look at things and everything else, and you want to go for a better cause. And so, and I was already done with it before I wanted to go in the Marine Corps. I was like, spoke to the Marine recruiter. I was like, this bullshit. But but for a few months of my life, for a few years of my time in Seaside, New Jersey, it's a different thing. But I know that you could take out a bigger enemy very quickly because they're very complacent. They just run their mouths, whatever, and they think people are going to back down. And then the problem is you don't. You stare them in the face and be like, nope, not me. You know what I'm talking about? And not in our society, you could do that. So it's just, what I'm saying? It's just, we're not based on violence. You know what I'm talking about? We're based on skill and talent, but it's just, I think that's why a lot of women, identified and I got along within Jersey, whatever, because I was so small. I was like, I know how difficult it is being my size. I constantly got to be on the move, constantly fighting, whatever. I was like, and you got to stand up to these men that are, twice your size on nonstop, and you're being raped. You know what I'm talking about? By other white people and shit like that. And God knows what happens with your family. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, and here I am, just always just very laid back, and I was like, all right. And I'll be laughing and joking, and oh, boom, out of the crowd. Fuck you, Supreme. It's like, fuck, here we go again. And then be talking shit and be like, we're going to throw down, and all my friends would be like, we're trying to do something, and be like, all right, let's handle this real quick, and you just shrug your shoulders, but all right, yeah, let's do this, whatever. And he's like jumping up and down, fuck you, this, and I'm just like, all right. and you know a few punches or whatever would get you going and everything like that. Your adrenaline, you never had to worry about, you never had to hype yourself up. And then you get back to your friends and you start where the conversation ended, and you laugh and everything else like that. So, but this is before MMA and everything, so I had a little bit leg up on everybody. So, long, long time ago, a lifetime ago, right? But you definitely learn a lot about human interaction at a very aggressive way. I'm talking about like like you see the pupils dilate or whatever. Are you high? Are you that angered by race? Do you really think you win no matter what? And that's the whole thing. Like, if you got someone that thinks they could win no matter what without thinking, you try to provoke that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what's up? You know what I'm saying? So they're pushing their adrenaline even more, or whatever. And so now they're tying themselves out to whatever. And you could just think about where's the best way to do that. And usually, I'll never go back to that lifestyle, whatever. But this is before people did groundwork and everything. And this is I'm telling you, this is before MMA. And I would just throw a few punches and I would just go for the ground or whatever and try to lock it. I'm talking about, and just hold them and tire themselves out. You know what I'm saying? So I remember like being in juvenile detention and someone's coming off of heroin and I'm just laying there. He was totally cool. It's like, yeah, I like black people and Puerto Rican. So I was like, okay, thank you for telling me that. And, he's a big white person and everything. And he was showing me tracks of his heroin and everything. And so I'm just sleeping, on the ground or whatever, laying there. And I just hear him screaming, going through withdrawals and shit like that, right? So I'm just laying there in my part of the cell, when I'm 15 or whatever. I don't know what the fuck I was as young. And finally he just says, fuck you, nigger. And I was like, sort of kind of awake or whatever. Boom, right to my head while I'm laying down. So I get up, you know what I'm saying? I tripod myself up or whatever. Got rocked or whatever, but he's like all kind of disoriented or whatever, coming off for heroin and shit like that. And he screamed or whatever, right? So that's how he got up, because he was like in pain and shit like that. So the whole line, so Black woke up or whatever, and he's just like coming at me, and I'm just like, initially laying there or whatever, right? And you just hear everybody banging, fuck him up, Supreme, fuck him up, Supreme. I'm like, fuck, dude, I don't know. It's like there's no one coming to my aid, no one, no one gonna help me and everything like that. It was never really the case anyways, And so I'm like, I don't know, man. I sort of like rocked a little bit. And then I just grabbed him, hooked his head like that as he as he's coming at me or whatever, punching. I was trying to stop the flail or whatever. And I just jumped up and sat down, and I just sat there right there. And that was the end of it. He passed out. Then went back to sleep. Guards came in. You know what happened? I was just an argument or whatever. I think now people know these things. I was lucky. I went to a wrestling school, and we got taught a few things here and there. We were really good, and everybody, they were they're supposed to. We got a free, not free. We got a lesson in freestyle wrestling. So we did, because what we learned was American folk, and American folk is what you learn in high school. Because there's three different types: typical, Greco-Roman, freestyle, which you use in the Olympics, and American folk. And so we always learn American folk, and occasionally we would learn, no one like Greco-Roman, but just for fun, it's like this so you know it or whatever. What they used back in the day. But everybody liked, the freestyle, and so, we would teach ourselves that, once we go it, you just do it like, like a reflex, so you don't even think about it. And so then I'm dazed and I'm tired, and he has a lot more strength than me, and all I had was my body weight. And so now he's trying to pull up 110 pounds of who I am, and I'm just locked on his head. And I just knew, like, wherever your head goes, you go. So I just made sure that his head was going down. So, that strengthens you why you don't want to do drugs, And this doesn't make you think correctly. It makes you not able to suppress your racism, like you're supposed to, So, civility, that needs to, it's easy to resort to violence. Easy, very easy. We think it's the hardest thing to do, to resort to violence to resolve it. Hardest thing is knowing that how effective violence is and still being civil. That's the hardest thing.
Army alongside a guarantee of safe conduct was enough to get the defender to surrender. If it did not, a stratagem of war was always a good alternative. Let's look at an illustrating example. The French city of Amiens was conquered by the Spanish using a stratagem of war in 1597. The Spanish approached the city under the cover of night and blocked all roads to and from the city with detachments of infantry. Then 500 infantrymen hid in houses, thickets and barns in front of the city. In the morning, the citizens and farmers strolled into the city oblivious of the danger that was to come. 30 Spanish men disguised themselves as women and farmers, hiding their weapons under their clothes and pretending to take their goods to the market. They entered the city with carts loaded with nuts for the market. As they passed the city gates, they threw one of the carts over, which spread the stored nuts all over the ground. Chaos ensued. People were swearing at the clumsy farmers while stealing the nuts. Taking advantage of the confusion, the intruders dropped their disguise, killed some residents, and neutralized the guards at the gate. Then they opened the gate in order to let in the man hiding in front of the city, as well as 4 additional companies of cavalry. In less than half an hour, they had taken over the city. The French then laid siege on the city to recapture it. If such a stratagem of war didn't succeed, army leaders took to much more violent alternatives. These ranged from cutting off the fortress from supply lines and starving out the inhabitants, to storming the walls with ladders. However, the option that interests us here is the formal siege. When an army wanted to lay siege on a fortress, it first established various quarters beyond the reach of the defense's artillery. The soldiers dug out entrenchments around these camps to secure them before the first offensive measures were taken. Then a contra and circumvallation was dug, that is, 2 lines of trenches which connected the various camps of the siege army around the city. Olaf van Nimwegen, an expert on Dutch warfare, states that this made it almost impossible to relieve a beleaguered city. because the inner ring, the circumvallation, made sorties beyond this point virtually impossible, while the outer ring, the contravallation, protected the sieging army from attacks from the outside. This is reminiscent of Caesar's famous siege of Alesia in 52 BC, where he had the rear of his army also fortified with an additional wall. Van Nimwegen's statement is supported, for example, by Maurice of Nassau's siege on the Spanish forces in the city of Gertrudenberg in 1593. Maurice even ordered the circumvallation to be continued on the sea by ships, so that the city was cut off completely. After about a month, a Spanish force tried to relieve the besieged, but it was repelled by the entrenched besiegers and weakened by an enemy foray. Starting at the circumvallation trenches, so-called approaches were dug towards the walls. To protect them against sorties, small redoubts were constructed, in which small detachments were placed. Often, the approaches were dug from multiple sides at the same time, so that defenders remained in the dark where the main attack would come from. In the case of the Dutch army under Maurice and his half-brother Frederick Henrik, each side was dug out by men of the same origin, which turned the digging into a contest of nations. The English who fought in the Dutch army competed with their Dutch and German comrades to get to the walls the fastest. Once the approaches were within firing distance of the first defensive position, the men began to sap. Saps were shoveled out zigzag ways, so that the guns of the fortress could not shoot along them. Additionally, up to 3 parallel trenches were dug out in regular intervals. They functioned as strongholds and provided cover for the troops and platforms for artillery. According to Georg Ortenburg, one major problem with all this earthwork was that the soldiers didn't like digging it at all. If the soldiers did the job themselves, they demanded an additional fee. But most of the time, this laborious and dangerous work had to be contracted out. Because of the high risk involved in the task, the contractors charged a lot. Sieges, therefore, required to have a substantial amount of money in reserve. While the attackers slowly came closer to the walls of the fortress, the defenders certainly didn't remain idle. They shot at the sappers and tried to disturb or destroy the constructions of the besiegers in sorties. Corresponding to this, the main task of the artillery of the offenders during the first phase of the siege was to silence the guns of the defenders. However, the cannonade often aimed at the town itself, in the hope of stirring up an uprising against the garrison. The inhabitants tried to protect themselves and their homes against such cannonades. They reinforced their roofs with layers of earth, and were ready to put out potential fires at all times. One example for a successful deployment of this strategy was the siege of Venlo in 1637. On the 24th of September, the besieging Spanish managed to set the town ablaze, whereupon the inhabitants, according to a letter of Frederick Henrik, quote, sought to take control of the person of the governor, of the arsenal, and lastly of the gateway, end quote. They forced the governor to negotiate with the besiegers, and Venlo capitulated the next day. This also shows the importance of artillery in such sieges. The historian Georg Ortenburg notes, quote, artillery was widely considered the most important means of attack, end quote. The most frequently used siege cannons were full and demi-cannons. However, not too many of these heavy guns were deployed at the same time, since they were very unwieldy. A complete 24-pounder, for example, required no fewer than 17 draught horses to be moved, and used a tremendous amount of powder. Van Nimwegen states, the recoil of such heavy cannons was so powerful that it would roll back 5 to 6 meters after each round. In addition to these giant but very slow pieces with a low frequency of fire, smaller guns of various kinds, such as culverines and breech-loading chamber pieces and early mortar pieces, were deployed. Olaf van Nimwegen mentions that during the siege of Ostend from 1601 to 1604, the defenders shot their way through an average of 2,000 pounds of powder each day, thereby releasing 300 balls. Artillery pieces were usually grouped in batteries, which were more effective when placed on elevated earthworks. In a trench, in front of each battery, an infantry detachment covered the guns against an enemy sortie. Before the addition of Ravelins in the second half of the 16th century, the middle of the curtain wall was the target. The main battery, tasked to dismantle the wall defenses, was placed in a distance matching its reach, i.e. 450 to 600 meters. Its main objective was to destroy the enemy artillery and parapet. It was the center of the whole operation and was reinforced by wings on each side, which targeted the neighboring bastions. While the cannons thundered over their heads, the men in the trenches had to be on guard not to be overrun by a sortie of the defenders. A sortie could be done in various ways, and its main goal was to weaken the position of the besiegers, for example by destroying their earthwork and artillery. Often the besieged tried to catch their enemies off guard. They tried to take them out with a quick cavalry charge, or invade the trenches armed with swords, daggers and other weapons suited for such confined spaces. These weapons were even more of an advantage in rainy weather, when the musketeers of the enemy who couldn't light their gunpowder were defenseless. The success of a sortie depended on two things. Firstly, on the element of surprise, and secondly, on the number of men deployed. Small garrisons had no chance to undertake effective actions against the besieger, because all men were needed on the walls. Let's look again at the siege of Amiens in 1597. During the French re-sieging, the beleaguered Spanish made several sorties. On the 22nd of May, thundered over their heads. The men in the trenches had to be on guard, not to be overrun by a sortie of the defenders. A sortie could be done in various ways,
my fault.
and its main goal was to weaken the position of the besiegers.
I'm sorry. My whole story probably just got muted over it. Fuck. Alright, if you need to, you can pull from it. I know some of you techno geniuses could get that audio. So you can have that at a higher level. But do that. How about that? I know you have access to it. Do that before it becomes an issue. Inoculate everybody. This should be open, so they already know. This would be a deterrent to them. So you get inoculated from dysentery, dengue, typhus. Before it even becomes an issue. That's what destroys armies inside of a siege. And then I'll get to my Iron Dome and the Air Force in a little bit. Push your defenses out. And what I said previous is very private. But it's a lifestyle that I'm so glad that the Marine Corps enabled me to leave and never have to think about again. It was highly imperfect way to do it. But totally left my system, Marine Corps helped with that, It's like a very small period of my life, a few months in Seaside, in New Jersey, whatever, So constantly fighting every couple hours. Someone my size, no one backed down. I was so small, I had to do something, It's sort of like Ukraine. Russia's not backing down. They have to do something. They're forced to do something. And they're more than capable of doing it. And not when I say more than capable, they're capable of walking into Moscow and into Minsk. But the problem is we need to stop them there before this escalates. And how do you stop the killing in the long term? We got to think in generational terms. How we get into space. We got Elon Musk, but he is thinking in a long term to colonization, preservation of the human life, become interplanetary species. These are cathedral projects, things you start, but people in generations from you'll never see the end of it. But even the person in the middle of it won't see the end of it, but a couple of generations later, we'll see the end of it. So we got to think in these terms, and we don't do that. It's like building roads. We attend to the current problems of the roads and the issue of the civil engineers. We don't even have civil engineers out here. It's just all nepotism and all this other bullshit. But in Jersey, New York, and it's a lot of political. Let's set down the GWB because Bergen County didn't vote for us, so let's fuck with them, You know what I'm saying? It's just like that's the only democratic part of the state and shit like that, right? So let's fuck with Hackensack and Teaneck and the Bayonne and everything like that. Fuck Bergen County, So shut down the thing, whatever, right? Anyways, my point being is that we only address the current problems for the next year or two. And we got to think in longer terms. Where's the population growth of Jersey, New York, and the surrounding area? And we could use that as like comparative how the population grows, and we could know that there's going to be additional vehicles on the road. And so what is the vehicle density within 20 years? And if we know we could only get that problem in 5 years, whatever, so let's address, and we can only do this every generation, let's make the roads handle that many cars 20 years from now, so we don't have that bottleneck, right? Because we have those bottlenecks in traffic, in our infrastructure. Let's say you got 1 million people, right, that are stuck in traffic for an hour, no fault of their own, and or commuting or whatever, and they should be at work. You know what I'm saying? So if you think about it like this, so instead of that, total 8-hour workday, now it's a 7-hour workday, right? So you got 1,000,000 hours every day, 1 hour, right? It's lost, it's gone. Tax revenue gone, our productivity gone. They're frustrated, I'm talking about. Is this the total, no one gains anything from it, having bad infrastructure, because that hour times 1,000,000, that's like a couple people's lifetimes of work that you never get back every day. Like a lifetime of how many hours you work in a lifetime. It's just gone per day. And it's just every day that's happening. And our productivity's gone because of our infrastructure. So it's phenomenal. I mean, you can do the math right now. And that's in just one area. So you take 1,000,000 hours, right? And then you take the average 20 years that someone works, right? 8 hours a day times how many days in the year they work. So 5 days out of the month. So that's 20. Let's say they work 20 days a month, right? Times 12. So, and how many years is that? You know what I'm saying? So it's just, and that's just gone. Every day gone. A whole life, couple lifetimes gone of work, productivity. Someone's entire, what they could do for their entire life. Our creativity, that what they put into, is gone. But you don't really notice that. So our infrastructure needs to be obviously improved, whatever. We don't think of those terms. We're just like, oh, they're stuck in traffic. But it's more than that. But every hour needs to be used. They're thinking in, they had their thinking is confined to what Putin wants. The Ukrainians are not. Use that to your advantage. Everything. So just don't say, oh, okay, we're free. No, use it to your advantage. Unfortunately, now a fire has to be lit under a lot of people's asses, whatever. But but knowing that it's temporary, and everybody together can move that shift over to democracy, where you could be more relaxed and cool, whatever, and everything. So, and then as a society, as a community, they can make that shift, and that'll probably be the most, the strongest and pleasant thing in the world, because you won, and you get to be, get to be your country and free and everything, but I can see the pain in people, but dig underground, make those hospitals, and I'll get to the Iron Dome and having air power in a second.
For example, by destroying their earthwork and artillery. Often the besieged try to catch their enemies off guard. They try to take them out with a quick cavalry charge, or invade the trenches armed with swords, daggers, and other weapons suited for such confined spaces. These weapons were even more of an advantage in rainy weather, when the musketeers of the enemy, who couldn't light their gunpowder, were defenseless. The success of a sortie depended on two things. Firstly, on the element of surprise, and secondly, on the number of men deployed. Small garrisons had no chance to undertake effective actions against the besieger, because all men were needed on the walls. Let's look again at the siege of Amiens in 1597. During the French re-sieging, the beleaguered Spanish made several sorties. On the 22nd of May, 500 Spanish cavalrymen left the fortress and headed for the main camp of the French. They managed to get as far as the earthwork protecting the camp. They took hold of the earthwork and were stopped only then by the French. After a fight of 2 hours, the French finally drove the Spanish horsemen back and pursued them. By the skin of their teeth, the Spanish just managed to close the gates before the pursuing French could enter the city. It took 400 Spanish infantrymen who rushed to the gates at the last possible moment to keep the French out. The final phase of a siege began when the attackers gained control of the covered way. While the artillery tried to reduce the defenders' foothold on the bulwark, engineers started to build a bridge or dam across the ditch. A breaching battery was placed immediately at the glacis, or as close to the wall as possible. It began to shoot a breach in the curtain wall or in the face of a bastion. This was done by aiming at a point above the lower third of the wall. The next shots would then be shot slightly to the left or the right. This was usually repeated over an extended period of time. This breach had to be big enough to let the men storm through it. If it was too narrow, the miners and sappers were called in. These specialists dug tunnels beneath the defensive works and the wall itself, and then set the supporting pillars ablaze to cause the tunnel and the fortifications above it to collapse. In many cases, powder kegs were placed under the target, sealed and lit. To counter these hidden attacks, the defenders dug tunnels as well. When they detected enemy miners, there were several ways to prevent them from accomplishing their work. For example, by invading their tunnels and taking them out in melee, or by blowing up the mine prematurely. When the attackers managed to breach the wall of the fort, the last line of defense had fallen. In most cases, however, the defenders surrendered before the storm of the fortress began. Holding on to resistance for too long could be a fatal error. In those cases, the defeated had to endure plundering and punishment rather than be granted safe conduct.
So, I mean, in a specific, we call it, engagement, war, I mean, you could even say why it started. They try to use black flag operations in the very beginning. I'll turn the lights. From the very beginning, they use this set of means. I mean, it's always a part of warfare and everything, but usually you would know about it. It's not about nationalistic pride and stuff like this. Like when Harold came in, or when the Normans came in, which is actually a derivative of settled Vikings came into England, whatever, right? It is just based on what Putin wants and a few people want in Russia. So it's just a very criminalistic thing. Like I said, it's a glorified armed robbery. On a world, a global stage. So to think that you're going to get safe passage, and I don't know, man. I mean, they already know this. How can you tell people this or that or whatever, So I'm like, what was the best decision for them to make? Here I am in Hawaii or whatever, And here it says, cause as much damage in a siege as possible. And to me, I think he was going to hold out. I think there's no way it's going to fall. I don't see how it is. We're just going to keep supplying it. They have the world fight. And if we take everything off the shoulders we could possibly do, we could do that even without air power. But we're an Iron Dome. but I'll get to that in a second. So inoculate them, make sure they have enough water, food, ammo, the correct weaponry, whatever, and keep pushing out. You know, instead of 10 miles, make that column 11 miles, or what is it, 18 miles, and make it 19 miles out, then 20 miles out, 21 miles out. Just, you know, it's like the reverse. They think they're getting closer, you just keep pushing it back, you know, whatever gets the shit. But, yeah. But I put up a map of Ukraine. But yeah, honestly, there's people in there. But like, yeah, it's kind of cramped in here. Boom, let's get some cement. You know, mixing things or whatever, so you can build supports, whatever, and dig. You know, get the excavators in there and shit like that. Pickaxes, it's like, and everything. You know, so you have more space and everything, and all the support, the daily needs that you need. You know, water and all that other stuff. Living space, and then your bath and sanitary stuff and everything. Just keep building, keep building, keep building. Non-stop building. Outbuild them. Outthink them. Outbuild them. You know, you got to do all at the same time under fire, you know. You know, it's like I would love to go to Kyiv, but you know, I have a fucked up leg and shit like that. You gotta be constantly moving. Who are they gonna listen to this? This little Indian, you know, this little Native American, you know, who has a shaded past, you know what I mean? So it's like, how much pull would I have, you know? You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, I put my information out there, and hopefully, like, people look at certain elements and like that. But all right, let's get this to them. Can't do this, but this makes more sense or whatever. You know what I mean? So I need those filters. You know what I mean? People that could put it concisely, build on it, put it where, you know, could do the most good. Remove the parts where it's like, oh, we know a little bit more about that, so that's not really what we could do, whatever. Trying to get the railways, traffic. It's never really coming. Let's see. I'm sure they could find it relatively quickly. So I know, like, the Germans used the massive biggest gun. You know, Hitler's like, I need the biggest gun, and I think they used it like once in combat at Sevastopol, and that was it. You know, so you don't want to be like Hitler and make some wounded weapon and spend all these resources and it doesn't work. What's working? Focus on what's working. You know, instead of like the psychological, propaganda, like, coming up with this crazy shit. Everybody focusing on, we're gonna win no matter what. It's like Russia's gonna win no matter what. It's just like, okay. It keeps going back and forth. Allow, allow. So what's happening? Can I get this in English? A second. I'm gonna take a photo of this. Okay, got some of it chopped off here. See how much I could show. Oh, there we go. Got a little bit more. A little bit more. I mean, so these military machinery is like really obviously deadly, but it's kind of delicate. If it's the more hours it's on the road, the more it's prone to break down, wear and tear. So they had to put it on rail. So if you throw a Molotov cocktail, I mean, I wouldn't try to hit the armor. I would try to hit where you see everything moving. If you see it moving, throw it at it because that's where it's delicate. And that heat, and it will expand out and then it has to contract or whatever, and it was cause more wear and tear. So it would be like causing like maybe a whole week or a year of wear and tear with just one Molotov cocktail and all that fine little moving parts and everything. So it might not break down then and there, but it will break down. So if you have to see it and all you have is that to do it, but now they're just blasting it like nonstop with stingers and everything else. And we have light and medium machine guns go for the delicate parts, you know. Anyways, I don't know how effective or that is, but I might as well state it. But here's the railways where they're trying to fix, you know, their logistical issues. I don't know if they're going to be able to. My feeling is that they're not going to be able to do it no matter what. But better safe than sorry, you know. So these people who are demonstrating, this is Latvia? All right, I'm not exactly sure. I think Petersburg is up here. Or is it right here? Petersburg, okay, up here. So these are the two cities that control Russia. So they're trying to go after Moscow. I mean, they're trying to go after Warsaw and decapitate the leadership, and they're trying to go to Kyiv, trying to decapitate the leadership, whatever. But this is all the railways that are supplying them. So instead of these people demonstrating and getting arrested, what they should be doing is going after all these railways surrounding Ukraine and Belarus. So this will slow them down. You start pulling up tracks and pins and ties and everything. I mean, there's no way the Russian military, it's already stretched. No way the Russian military could guard every single square foot, meter or whatever of the rail line. And it's a lot safer than getting arrested. And so what you're doing is just delaying it. You're not killing anybody, not killing any Russians. You're just you're just holding them up, you know. And that forces them under economic sanctions. Now they've got to put more resources into making railway ties, and that kind of thing. And you just put coal down, you know, barbecue coal, light it up. And like I said, they did it in Civil War. They wrapped it around trees and everything else like that. And we call it Sheridan's bow ties and everything. You just take a truck, hook up some chains or whatever, and just rip it right off and just bend it a little bit. They can't use it again. And so now they got to go a whole construction process to rebuild it. And so you're delaying them, forcing them to a whole area of now where they have to build. So you're forcing them to build and you're outbuilding them. And you're delaying them again. So, and now you're attacking at ones and twos, these tanks that could come through, whatever. Now you're forcing these tanks to go on the road and being wore down, even more prone to wear down, and more fuel to be used, you know? So I think that's the safest thing. You can say go after fuel and blow it up or whatever, but it's kind of dangerous, you know? You don't want people risking their lives. I mean, they're not, in Russia, they're not going to ride or die, you know, and I don't think yet. Some are, you know, I'm talking about, but honestly, this is more of a civil resistance, you know, and I think that's probably the safest option. Be like, hey, you know, it's like, hey, prevent your people from going there as much as possible. The much you slow the army coming going there, the less chance they're going to die. See if you could hold them up in Russia as much before they go there and die. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and there's a lot of their cousins and their brothers and wives and husbands and your grandfather, niece, they're all in Russia and Ukraine. It's just like, you know what I mean? Just hold it up. Be like, look, have people stop and think for a little bit, you know, be like, hey, you know, civility, it needs to reign supreme, man. You know what I mean? It's just like, and that's where I could survive and I could thrive, you know what I mean? It's always the best in the intermixed of cultures. I always do the best. And and if it's my secret, it's just like if I'm in just one community, I never really do all that good because it's just one. Even if it's like even Latinos, because I'll just be one of 1,000. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I mean. Plus, I don't know Spanish, but once I'm in different communities or whatever, everybody's equal and they get along. I always, I always seem to rise, whatever. Here, Hawaii, it's all Asian and everything. So, but I still pull on my own community, and I'm still thankful for Italian, Irish, and Puerto Rican. But anyways, I'm digressing. Use your connections to the advantage. Don't ask them to kill people. Don't ask them to make more chaos. Just ask them to stay home and not die and get involved in this shit. Don't get involved. I'm not asking you to choose one side or the other. I'm asking you to choose the side of life. You know what I mean? Ask them to do that and do whatever you can in Russia so you could help them nudge to choose life over death, civility over death. You can't ask people to go against their country. You can't ask people to kill their own countrymen. I mean, it's just like that's nuts. That's going to destroy the world. But you can ask them to live and do whatever it takes for them to live, because people already sent in. It's over for them. They're dead. They're going to be hunted down and killed, and they have every right to be angry. The Ukrainians, every right to kill them. So you gotta slow them down as much as possible. Whoever civil disobedience to slow those people coming in, just like don't go there, man. It's a tombstone. Just let it, halt it as much as possible. And if you hold them as part, it's more manageable for them. So you're saving more lives. So you're buying time for all these other things to be put into play too. Hopefully, we're organizing so democracy could overtake the few hundred people that are in control of Russia. And a nation of millions of people, a few hundred control it. It's crazy. A few hundred people condemned 100,000 Russians to death, and in the process killing a lot of Ukrainians. A couple dozen really, but we'll say a few hundred. But that being said, if Ukraine could come in and counterinsurgency, blow up the bridges also in Russia, and Belarus, soon Belarus, but in Russia coming in, delay them even more. Now they're forced to take time to cross that ravine, that bridge, slowing them even more. You know what I mean? So you have all the let's say the wars over here. Most of the wars like here. I'm just drawing an arbitrary line, right? So this is where most of the fighting is, right here. There's not going to be too much over here. So you could get in teams to blow bridges and infrastructure and everything else like that over here, slowing them down. Railways, bridges, whatever else. Have at it, whatever it is. I'm not going to say. I'll leave it at that, But I would definitely go after main intersections and stuff. Like you're just trying to slow them down as much as possible. You stop them in certain cases, but think about it like this: if you stop a tank for a day or so, right? And there's 100 tanks, that's 100 days. You know what I mean? For each tank, you know what I'm saying? So you gotta think in terms like that. You push it out. not only do you handle what's right then and there, because that's your thinking is right there, right in front of Kyiv. And if most of the fighting is in that range right there, counterattack, counter synergy outside of whatever, you know what I'm saying? So don't get find where they want you to put the most people right in that into that battle space right there so they could handle you, you know? But when you're being attacked, the best thing to do is to counterattack. Because you're constantly trying to adjust to their actions or whatever, right? And you got to do that. Plus, you know, go after what they got. You know, you take the momentum away from them. You slow down their momentum. And obviously, you need Ukrainians that can speak perfect Russian, no accent. You know, I'm a refugee going into Russia. Take out those bridges. You just keep taking out the bridges as far as you go. You know what I mean? You shut it down. You shut down Russia. Nothing in or out of Russia. No trucks, no railway lines, nothing. No commerce. And so what they have, the military, arsenal what they have now is what they have. They don't have the means to make any more. The money, the material, resources, the will. And now it's slow to even get there. So on every different front. And I know it's difficult because you're killing Russians, but this is where you also reach out. At the same time you're killing, you're reaching out with a hand. Be a democracy. We want this to end. We don't want to kill people. We don't want to die. You know, we want to get into this mayhem. This is not a life I want to live, right? How do you do that? Make it a democracy. That's strength. Knowing you got to kill somebody, but also reach out your hand. It's deadly to do that. But how do you do it? You know, you got to do it. You know what I mean? Handle the threat. And be like, look, man, we don't want to do this. We really do not want to do this. Be a democracy. I mean, the you know, I mean, you want to kill the enemy, don't get me wrong. But if you get deep into thought, do you really want to do this? Nobody does. You want to stop and kill people trying to kill you. Yeah, of course. That's psychologically, our brains are wired like that. You know, we see blood and we get heightened. You know, and but you know, that's exactly, you got to override that. Extend your hand. That's civility. But yeah, all these railways coming in. And I think what I was thinking, Finnish up in Finland. Let's just put up this map. Because actually, oops. He's not, he wants Königsberg. Look how close Warsaw is, Belarus. They're going straight Kyiv, they're going to go straight for Warsaw. That's my thinking. But I think everybody already figured that out. You know, and then to guard their flanks, they'll go after these Baltic states. So this is guarding their flanks, Russia. And then for Belarus to guard their flanks from Ukraine to push down deep. And you get the big chunk of Poland. That's the biggest one right there, right? Then you could get Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. And Moldavia will be an easy pushover. So you take out the biggest ones first. And then you go after the small ones. But since you get the straight shot, you go right into Lithuania, Estonia. But I'm thinking there's got to be some kind of Finnish intelligence. And needs to be highly active in St. Petersburg. There's going to be a lot of Finnish speaking, Finnish culture, that kind of thing. It sort of merges into Russia, sort of merges into Finland, that kind of thing. You know, I mean, I'm not saying it's not a total divide. And that intermixing of Finnish and Russian culture right in this peninsula right here, that little isthmus right there needs to be heavily utilized. You know, everybody, every townsperson, everybody in there, you know, that knows Russian, Finnish, and has family on just the other side of St. Petersburg needs to be involved. You know, in some way of fashion or whatever, to get that into a democracy. You know, I mean, it's just hit St. Petersburg and Moscow. You know, so you get St. Petersburg a little bit easier to what do you call it? Convince to be a democracy. Then I mean, you can convince Moscow is a little further away, but right there you got it. You get that, and that's where the revolution started. The Soviet Leningrad. I mean, Lenin, Stalin, all those people. Let's Google that. The main population center, and they slowly took over the rest of Russia, and then they beat the Russians, and it was in the middle of a war. Right now, you know, talking about like, what the fuck you people doing? You send all these people over the trench to die for what? And you know, the thing is about like communism and everything, and Karl Marx and all the back in the day. You know, it sounds all good on paper, be all equal, but in practice, humans are greedy. And we're power hungry. We want to be better than our neighbor. That's fine. You know, we don't suppress all those things as good as we should. But how do we do that most effectively? We found out it's a hybrid system of taking a little bit of communism, taking a little bit of capitalism, taking a little bit of fascism, mixing it up, having at the core of it democracy with a parliamentary procedures, but taking certain elements over here. You know, the military industrial complex also. That's the fascism. But we also have our social programs, that help us out, trying to build a little base so you can at least have the necessities of life and increase or whatever. So we found out that's the best way. And it's imperfect, highly imperfect. But, and it was based on a lot of racism and genocide of my people and everything like that. But by and large, good people will win out. And you always push for, a better life, a better nation, and to what even the people that came up with knew they were not, because they were slaveholders. So that's what we found out. Democracy and having all these people come together, building consensus. And that is what grows of having, using resources, everybody. And saying that is what you need. Not some doctrine that says, okay, this is socialism, everybody's going to be equal, and that's it. And what it is, that's people are going to, what happened in communism, people stated it, but they weren't really that. They hoarded resources, so it's highly corrupted. It doesn't work in practice. And it's just basically what a Soviet state is, and what China is. It's a dictatorship. It's a kingship, basically. Whatever, I'm saying. It's a rule of one person. I don't know. Let's see what this is.
1894, Nicholas II has just been coronated as the Emperor of Russia. Before continuing, there's a technical matter which needs to be resolved: the calendar. To simplify, the Russian calendar was 13 days behind the Gregorian calendar in use today, which is why some things like the October Revolution are said to have occurred in November. For this episode, both calendars will be used. So, Nicholas II was an absolute monarch, which meant that he had the final say on everything concerning the Russian Empire, which was huge. During the late 19th century, Russia had seen rapid industrialization. Alongside this came new ideas, such as the communist ideals of a certain Karl Marx, which led to the working class of Russia demanding greater representation. So, to grossly oversimplify, communism is a political ideology which argues that the means of production, such as factories, should be collectively owned by everyone as opposed to individuals. It wanted to abolish social classes and believed that the economy should be entirely controlled by the central government. The Imperial Russian government suffered from being somewhat distant and incompetent. For example, agriculture was slow to industrialize and there were numerous foreign policy failings. The most notable of these failings were the ones which caused conflict with the Japanese, leading to the 1904 Russo-Japanese War. So, to simplify, the reasons for war can largely be chalked up to Japan expanding its influence in Korea and Russia refusing to accept it. The Japanese decided that war would settle it and so launched a sneak attack against the Russian fleet in Port Arthur, which Russia had leased from China. The Japanese would continue with a string of victories, such as the Battle of Mukden and the Battle of Tsushima. This embarrassed the Russians, and during peace negotiations led by a certain Sergei Witte, Russia lost Port Arthur and half of Here. Unfortunately for Russia, military defeat wasn't their only problem at this time. The most notable event was called Bloody Sunday, in which a priest called Father Gapon led a procession through Russia's capital St. Petersburg to present a petition to the emperor. The crowd was fired upon, leading to hundreds of deaths, which then caused riots across the empire. Witte was tasked with ending the rioting and presented a compromise: the formation of political parties and an elected assembly called the Duma. For the record, this Duma was mostly useless since it had no authority and Nicholas II could still do whatever he wanted. There were some elections and the emperor appointed a new prime minister, Pyotr Stolypin. Would bring about much needed agricultural reform before being assassinated in a theatre in 1911. in front of the emperor. 1914 was a big year for Russia since St. Petersburg was renamed to Petrograd because it sounded more Russian. Another event which was also probably important was the First World War, in which Russia had mixed success. To raise morale and against the advice of literally everyone, Nicholas appointed himself as the head of the army. He left his wife, Empress Alexandra, in charge of the capital with her advisor, Grigory Rasputin. After Russia's failings on the Eastern Front, Rasputin was blamed for corrupting the royal family and was eventually assassinated in 1916. Nicholas, as the head of the army, was seen as responsible for the failings of the war. War fatigue and food shortages led to protests which Nicholas had hoped to put down with the army. Well, the army mutinied and joined the protesters. In order to calm the situation, some Russian generals met with Nicholas and urged him to abdicate, which he did in 1917. Nicholas's abdication led to certain exiled peoples, most notably Vladimir Lenin, returning to Russia. It was people like Lenin who undermined the new provisional government by forming a rival one, the Petrograd Soviet. Lenin immediately began calling for the overthrow of the provisional government, promising the Russian people land, food, and an end to the war. The provisional government had decided not to end the war, and many people took to the streets to protest, and at the front of this protest stood Lenin's communist faction, called the Bolsheviks. The government forces decided to open fire, and many prominent Bolsheviks, such as Leon Trotsky, were arrested, and Lenin was forced to flee to Finland. Trotsky wouldn't spend long in prison since the new Russian Prime Minister, Alexander Kerensky, appointed a new head of the army, Lvir Kornilov. Kerensky and Kornilov quickly fell out, and Kornilov marched his troops on Petrograd. Kerensky released many of the Bolsheviks since their military arm, the Red Guard, were the only ones that could stop Kornilov. Kornilov never reached Petrograd due to Bolshevik sabotage and was later arrested. Lenin returned to Russia and, in a shocking turn of events, called for the overthrow of the government. This time, the overthrow was to be violent. Lenin placed Trotsky in command of the revolution. The Bolsheviks seized city infrastructure, Kerensky fled, and shortly afterwards the Bolsheviks seized the Winter Palace, the seat of the Russian government. Lenin then declared to the Petrograd Soviet that the Bolsheviks were now in control, and Trotsky dismissed their opponents. Immediately after the revolution, Lenin announced 3 decrees. There was the decree on peace, which promised to put an end to the war, the decree on land, which abolished private land ownership and allowed peasants to divide land amongst themselves, and the decree on workers, which introduced a minimum wage. Lenin also brought in universal healthcare and education, increased the rights of women alongside accepting Finland's Declaration of Independence. The Bolsheviks announced that there would be free and fair elections the next month, which the Bolsheviks lost. This was not what Lenin had planned, so he ordered the Red Guard to shut down the elected assembly and had himself placed in charge. Moscow was declared Russia's new capital, and Lenin switched to the Gregorian calendar. In the March of 1918, after some tough negotiations and an invasion, Trotsky and a team of delegates managed to secure a humiliating peace with the Central Powers. This treaty, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, gave up all of this territory to Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, although they themselves would be forced to give this up in the Treaty of Versailles. To many in Russia, this peace was long overdue. To others, such as the Czechoslovakian Legion, it was a complete betrayal. The Czechoslovakian Legion had fought for Russia in the First World War in return for Czechoslovakian independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. After peace was declared, they revolted. Their initial success spurred other enemies of the Bolsheviks to take up arms as well, thus beginning the Russian Civil War in earnest. In terms of the factions, the Bolsheviks and their supporters are called the Reds. Those who opposed them are known as the Whites. Britain, France, Japan and the United States elected to intervene on the side of the Whites. It was mostly to reopen the Eastern Front against Germany, but there was also a great worry about the spread of communism. The Whites were initially very successful, but it wasn't long before their progress stalled. This was because they weren't very unified, and many of those fighting against the Bolsheviks were fighting for their own independence, not to restore the Russian Empire. The White generals were also somewhat useless. For example, Alexander Kolchak struggled to keep his officers sober, insulted his allies, and executed tens of thousands of people, turning them to the Bolshevik cause. He did manage to capture Yekaterinburg, where the former emperor was being held. The Bolsheviks didn't want the emperor to fall into enemy hands, and so he and his family were executed on July 17, 1918. The Reds had the advantage of geography. Their territory was much more compact and had greater levels of industrialization. It had better infrastructure, lines of communication, raw materials, and a larger population. To maintain order in this area, the Bolsheviks began what is called the Red Terror. This involved sending dissidents to work camps, shooting protesters, and Trotsky holding the families of generals hostage so they'd stay loyal. Eventually, it became clear to the Allies that the Bolsheviks were going to win. The Allies withdrew, and the Czechoslovakian Legion returned to Czechoslovakia, which was independent by then anyway. The collapse of the Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires meant that many peoples in Eastern Europe were looking to establish their own nations and borders. The Polish, led by Józef Piłsudski, wanted to expand the newly independent Poland at the cost of Russia. At the same time, the Bolsheviks were also looking to spread communism to their neighbours and reconquer Russia's old territories. The Bolsheviks also believed that the turmoil in Germany and the former Austro-Hungarian Empire meant that communist governments could be set up there as well. In 1919, the Polish invaded Ukraine and captured Kiev. The Bolsheviks counterattacked and forced the Polish all the way back to Warsaw. The Polish repulsed the attack, thus maintaining their independence and stopping Bolshevik forces from entering Germany. These borders were established, with Ukraine and Belarus becoming socialist republics, which were essentially Russian puppet states. Having failed to spread communism to Eastern Europe, for now, the Bolsheviks moved to secure their position in Russia. Lenin turned to fixing Russia's economic woes by implementing the new economic policy. This allowed some private enterprise, a distinctly non-Bolshevik ideal, to help revitalize the economy. In 1922, Russia and its surrounding socialist republics, which were nothing more than puppet states, agreed to form the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Lenin had become unwell during the early 1920s, and after a series of strokes was left bedridden until his death in 1924. Lenin's death left a power vacuum which only two men could fill. The first was Trotsky, the second was a certain Joseph Stalin. Stalin had played a role in the Russian Revolution prior to this, first as an editor of the Bolshevik newspaper and also as a commander in the Red Army during the invasion of Poland. By the time of Lenin's death, Stalin held the position of General Secretary, the highest political post in the USSR. Stalin was able to forge alliances with other prominent party members and concealed Lenin's criticisms of him. So Trotsky and Stalin held two distinct positions with how to proceed. Trotsky's position is known as permanent revolution. Trotsky felt that unless socialist revolution was encouraged in other countries, the Bolsheviks' revolution would halt and it would become impossible for the Soviet Union to survive. Whereas Stalin's belief, known as socialism in one country, argued that socialism within the USSR should be strengthened before it could be exported anywhere else. So, long story short, Stalin was victorious in the struggle for power, and in 1929 Trotsky was exiled from the Soviet Union. He ended up in Mexico, where he was assassinated in 1940. After his victory, Stalin began to tighten his grip over the Soviet Union. He did this via purges, assassination, censorship, and a secret police force, the NKVD. Stalin removed many members of the Communist Party and famously purged the officers in the Red Army. Stalin's most famous tools in maintaining order were the Gulags, the successor to Lenin's work camps. The conditions in these camps were almost unbearable and the mortality rates were incredibly high. Stalin wasn't just a tyrant, he also brought about many domestic reforms, such as the 5-year plans, which were designed to improve industrial output, which it did to a miraculous degree. Another reform introduced was collectivization, whereby farmers were forced to unite their farms in order to increase crop yields and speed up mechanization. It should be remembered that Stalin's reforms changed Russia from an empire struggling to keep up to a political and economic powerhouse. So, in conclusion, the legacy of the Russian Revolution is hard to measure. In many respects, all it did was replace one authoritarian regime with another. It's worth noting that the actions of Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin and many others helped turn Russia into a superpower, one which was vital to stopping the Nazis. One area where it definitely changed the world was that it marks the last point in which Russia and the West saw each other as allies. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching.
Trotsky, was it Mexico City? Something like they paid some dude to kill him with a pickaxe or some shit like that. You know, because Stalin wanted him dead and whatever, wanted to take care of it before the war or some shit like that. Nice pick. Where's it gonna get at? As Russia changed in the revolution and it was hitting industrialization, I think one thing he sort of messed up is that the war caused a change in society that it need to industrialize, because war forced that to heavily focus in on industrialization to mobilize for the war. So whatever regime took over, that was naturally going to happen. That's my thinking. I'm not, I agree a lot of different points of that. I'll just probably just adjust it here and there. But like I said, as this thing progresses, you're constantly correcting, constantly adjusting. You know what I mean? Depending on what information you have available, But and it's all kind of relative. Um, because you have this population and a large landmass, and granted, it's consolidated in the Europe part of it. Um, we, it's sort of like, but this is what Russia is. If you look at a building, right? You walk inside any kind of building, like in New York or something like that, right? Or any place, um, there's a structural beam, right? And then that's strong enough to hold it up, but we put this big thing around it, so we think it's bigger than what it is. Just, stucco and everything like that, so it's like a colonnade. Not a colonnade, but it looks like a column. But it's just like a false column, but it has a structural beam right there. It's sort of like Russia. It's like every other country in Europe, but it has all this big stuff left, and there's nothing inside of it. This whole region. In here. But our mentality thinking how big Russia is, it really psychologically it always affects every decision we make. They use that to advantage, big Russia, big Russian bear. But you got to look at it more. I think this is where numbers play a little bit more into it. You got to look at the population of Russia comparatively. What I'm talking about. And don't get me wrong, don't get over specific and detailed about it, but I think it's more important to take that the connotation of and that feeling that how big it is. I'm saying it's physically big, but it's really nothing there. That's how they're able to, because the Russian people are very aggressive and expansionist. Of course, they push back all the way to the Pacific, whatever, but there's really nothing there. There's indigenous people all up in here, and all that other stuff, So it's in like, it's wilderness. So that's all it is. And then that's another brings me up on. Speaking to these people in China, when they finally know you're native, they think you're a sub Chinese, whatever, like native people. Like you're really like, no, man, I'm not your people, and I hate to I want to say we're all one people, and make these divides, whatever, and I can't suppress racism. But when someone's confronting me like you're not me, you're something sub below me, because I'm Native American, I was like, no, I am not your people. Native American, I'm talking about. It's just like we've been here for tens of thousands of years, you know what I'm saying? But you hear that argument from Asians, whatever, and that's why they're like, whatever. So, yeah, if we could get people to think he's Arab or Hindu, cool, whatever, you know what I'm saying? But, I'm saying it's okay because you get to deceive and manipulate these dumb Americans, we already think he's like a sub Oriental, whatever. It's just like that's what they think of Native people are. But China's army would make sense that, oops, they fled over um, Look how close Seoul Korea is to North Korea. They can cut it off. It's right there. So before they stage everything and they just shove all the way down, just like spearhead it, like a flying wedge. And they go right after Tokyo, split Japan in two. And that way, you divide it. You do it super quick. That's probably what China's plans are. I can almost guarantee it. You take out the biggest enemies first. That'd be South Korea and Japan. You loot it for everything they got while we're occupied fighting this war in Europe. So what South Korea needs to do is on the DMZ, and what we need to do is make it impenetrable. I'm talking about like that Star Fortress. Lay down concrete. You could destroy all the fortifications after the war, but better safe than sorry. You just make the DMZ this massively impenetrable. Nothing could go through it, like concrete, 100 feet high, that kind of thinking, like you just can't. There's already no commerce, so you're not really destroying any commerce or whatever. You're just redoubling the effort, so you're not forced to, do amphibious landings or whatever, sort of like Pacific Rim, the Kaiju. What I'm saying? You build a massive wall, and you just have it sloped in the behind it or whatever, as big as you can get. And I would do that shit now, before they flood over North Korea into South Korea. You know what I'm saying? Why not? You know what I'm saying? Because if North Korea becomes a democracy, you could destroy it or whatever. But you gotta sacrifice some of the infrastructure along the border or whatever. But if we're preoccupied over in Europe, this is what's gonna happen. They're gonna flood over and take South Korea. They're gonna go right for Tokyo. They're gonna get Taiwan. And honestly, I could see the Chinese just taking everything from here down also, right from Russia, because they're going to be expended, right? And all these small little countries here, Nepal, Bhutan, this is that civil war. They could easily take those, you know what I'm talking about? It's just like, we go after the big ones first. Any part that has a significant Chinese population, and then if it has a significant population, they're going to say they're sub-Chinese, and the Chinese, because they're the center of the world, everything to be Chinese. Their ability to them, they're the best people. Everybody else is below them. Everybody else is subhuman, Untermenschen, is a sub-Chinese. I'm a sub-Chinese or whatever. I'm a no-Chinese. I'm a no-Oriental. That's what I am. I'm native. I'm Hispanic, from Spain, Portuguese, Basque. I can't hide that. You know what I mean? Of course, I got a little German, Jewish, Swedish, Irish, but Berber, some Esclavo, slave blood too also. But the Andalusian, see, all parts of Spain, Castilian, Andalusian, Portuguese, Leon, historically, all those places, Catalan and Basque, whatever. So I'm just like the totality of what Spain is, and a little bit of Northern European and Native American, Plains Indian, Pueblo, in that region of Texas, Apache, So I'm just basically those two things, native and Spain. with intermixing of a few other things. I am not Oriental. I'm not a sub thing. You don't tell me what to do. You don't have the right to deceive, manipulate, and constantly lie. But that's what I get from Asians. I'm over here, and it's okay to deceive. I don't have conversations with them. White people get to talk about, but to me, I'm that sub thing. And it's okay to lie to other people. It's okay to lie to other communities. What I am, deceive, because they're not even people. Whoever, police, federal government, whatever it takes, so they could, you know what I'm saying? It's just like they don't even give a shit. Because they want to lie on the ideology of what China is. And at some level, that's what it is. I don't want to state that that's where the loyalty is, but they definitely hide behind it, And I didn't want to state that because it's America. We're all pushing for equality, but fortunately, race plays a lot to do with it. And now that I'm looking at like Ukraine, on one side it's more Polish, and over here it's more Russian, and in the center is kind of Ukrainian, and this is not over towards the Donbass. It's not really Ukrainian, but it is Ukrainian. It's sort of what Hawaii is. It's not really America, and they have allegiances to Asia, whatever, and they heavily use it. And that's what frustrates me because that's not my culture. But you're stating that you're Latino, but you're what you eat, how you speak, and your mannerisms and everything is from these external countries. And here I am, trying to state to you that Latino, the core of it is being native, and these Caribbean tribes and Latin America, though that is a very integral part of being Latino, and that's a foreign concept to them. They want it to be something else, some aspect association with just a little bit of Spanish. Okay, well, I have a Spanish name or whatever, and that's not being Latino. And so they're trying to like augment that to, oh, that's Puerto Rican, and I'm like, that's not. I mean, you just don't try to take certain elements and be like, okay, that's Latino. It's a community overall thing. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of different parts to it, and I don't want to dissect it or whatever, but I could, and I used to, but the end result is that it doesn't build a bond, a connection. I think that's most important because you try to be more American and build those connections and that bond and community, but it's just that disconnect right there because you're already Middle Pacific, and they believe they deal with all these different people. In reality, it's just all different parts of Asia. And to them, since they feel like their Asian is the best, they're reaching out to different Asians, whatever. They'll be like, okay, I could get along with this guy, even though my Asian is the best. I'll deal with this other Asian. This other Asian's like, even though my Asian is the best, I'll deal with this other Asian. To them, that's multicultural, but in what they feel like is like, now we're all Asian over here, and we're all basically unified, so we don't have to deal with these other people, so we're better than them. So you still have that Asian centric feeling, and they're very xenophobic towards their own Asian or whatever. So and they feel like they have a right to just use whatever, okay, say, use whatever to their means to be like, okay, I'm Hawaiian, or I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm Irish or whatever, And so, I learned that very early on. So I made sure that I was just like, I just got to be who I am. I already left that kind of hustling, bullshitting thing back in Jersey. I made sure to be like, hey, this is what I am. And it's just, you just make a decision to be very honest with people, But Yeah, I mean, there's a few Puerto Ricans out here. A few people from Northeast. But you can't really build a bond with someone that's not doesn't love themselves. You know, I can't escape who I am. You know, it's like, you know, growing up in Jersey. But if you are like Filipino and you say that you're Hawaiian, and since you've been here 3 generations, 4 generations, um, the majority of blood is Filipino, but you think you have the right to say you're Hawaiian, but you're still Filipino. You're still are connected to the Philippines. You still are connected to Asia, whatever, you know. What about the very few Hawaiians that are left, and the Tongans and Hawaiians, and now you're saying, oh, Tongans are ugly, Samoans are ugly, and all this other stuff. They look so different from Hawaiians, and you're telling people in the mainland, oh, Hawaiians are so different from Samoans, Tongans, and Tahitians. Oh, well, you want to say you're a little bit Tahitian because they're exotic or whatever, but it's Hawaiians and Samoans are nearly identical looking. They're literally identical looking. Same with Tongans, you know, but in their mentality, they try to force this this perception that they're different because they want to believe they're Hawaiian. You know, saying, but in the core, they're not, and they push out this lie, and it's just very destructive. So it's just self-destructive for them, and it's something I never wanted to get involved in. You know, you know what I mean? It's just like, you know, and you know, I think like pushing out the truth is very powerful. It's not as strong. It's not doesn't travel as fast as a lie, but it's very steady because even people don't really like you, but they'll hear to the truth more or whatever. Like, oh well, Supreme's this and that, but he's Latino, he's Native, you know. And you could joke and say all these other things, but at the end of the day, you know these things, you know. Um, like even now, like you speak to my biological sisters, you know. But you know, it's like ah, all depends. And you can see it in the society, you know. It's like how much you convince somebody that you have this or that this skill, and they're very focused in on this perception. But you know, a lot of Pacific Islanders are highly corrupted. Like very, all of them are just very dysfunctional, you know. So unfortunately, it's just part of it, you know. And I hate to say it, you know, Tongan, you know, political systems is highly corrupted. And you see that here in Hawaii. And so they push this narrative that it's not accurate, and they live in this cesspool of this. It's second nature to this lie, you know. And I remember being in that growing up in Jersey. I just did not want to be that, you know. I knew what not to become, but I didn't have that foundation of family and everything to know what to be. I knew what not to be. I knew to fight against that, but not what to be, you know, all those good nuances or whatever, right? But you would see how parasitic this island is towards the rest of the federal government. They just want to take what they can because they feel like well, Native Hawaiians get certain amount of resources and that works. So they parasite off that. A lot of Asians be like, well, since if we state we're Hawaiian, we get this, whatever, right? So this, and what goes to Hawaiians is very little. And they just redirect that aid, and they do it literally very ostensibly. It's not even hidden because no one verifies it, because no one thinks about Hawaii. You know, no one has the resources to basically watchdog all the resources. And this is New York, Jersey, Texas, California. They're producers, right? Florida, they produce for the rest of the country. So a very small amount of the states produce for the rest of the country. Hawaii is not one of them, so they always They always have their hand out, taking, taking, taking. And it's in that mentality where, so they say whatever works, whatever associates to get more of it, you know? And so that works in this society. Be like, oh, okay, I'm Hawaiian, I'm Native or whatever, you know, talk about when they're really just Asian, because they want that aspect, that perception or whatever. But in the core, that's not who they are. And so it's just like, I can't do that self-hate. You know what I mean? It's like, I am who I am, and I would love whoever I was, you know? People are like, well, what if you were Arab or Hindu or whatever? I would have to love myself, you know what I mean? But I am what I am. I'm Native American. Most of my blood is that. You can make an argument how much is it, you know, border tribes and all that other stuff, but, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to have to say, well, he's probably an amalgamation of all those tribes we never really heard of in that area of Texas, in that region, Apache, Comanche, and everything else. And to state that I'm not Apache or Comanche, when those are the dominant, you know, nations, tribal Native American nations, is really, you know, you're just lying to, you know, you just, how do you logically come up with that I am not, you know what I'm saying? So I am immensely filled with pride that I'm Native, you know? It's just like, I'm so grateful. The best nation in the world. Every day I wake up and I get to be that, you know? Nothing can change it, no lie. Nothing, you know? I wish I had, my leg was better or whatever, but it fills me up. I mean, you can't take that away from me. No matter how hard you try. And that I don't know, you just can't destroy it, you know, because you're in the greatest nation in the world and you're Native. And most of your blood is Native, you know what I mean? It's like, it's hard to describe, you know. It's nothing. And, you know, you have this uniqueness that it's hard to believe because you grew up, I grew up on the outside of Brooklyn, I mean, outside of New York, Manhattan. My dad, you know, was born in the Bronx, and he had family up in Harlem and in the Bronx and everything. And you're adopted native into an Italian family. It's so unique, and you're so lucky. The biggest, greatest city in the world. And then you move down to Seaside, New Jersey before all the TV shows, and it's just absolutely wild. A dozen police on Cushman's back in the day, a dozen of them, right? Now there's like a lot, state troopers and everything. But it would balloon up to hundreds of thousands of people on the boardwalk, and you only had 12 cops, and, you know, you're being a kid, and you're from Jersey, and it's already you're already crazy, and everybody, Jersey, we're all very sociable in Jersey, right? And then you got Seaside. It's even very party atmosphere. And being Latino, even more socially assertive, very sexually open. What I'm not going to get into it, whatever. But it's just like we think sex is like went back in the day was like a handshake. It's no big deal. And then on top of that, you had all the people that could not afford a real vacation, go to Florida, Cancun, Miami. That place is, go to Seaside. So you got that demographic. So coming down to Seaside, you know what I mean? So it was wild. With 12 cops. And people were like, well, talk shit about Seaside. It's like, oh, yeah, there's people in Seaside or whatever. I'm not like that. And then, in Jersey, all parts of Jersey, like, oh, okay, well, I'm not that person, but I know for a weekend, you were that person. You're going absolutely crazy. So don't tell me we're lower class than rest of Jersey, whatever, But that week or that weekend, that you went all crazy, partying, drinking, fucking, I mean, that was 4 or 5 months out of the year for us, Like it's like, what can 12 police officers do? It's just everywhere, on the boardwalk, under the boardwalk, on the beach, in the clubs. So it's like, they had to deal with racism, yeah. But some of the best times of my life, And it's so very unique, I'm glad I didn't grow up on the reservation or in Texas, and where the native people get isolated from. And granted, my mom was a little bit of a very racist or whatever, but that racism, she made sure to get in Native Americans. Like, they wouldn't adopt anybody else. So it's just like, that sword cuts both ways. I got pulled out because of my race, and I got pulled into a family and a part that felt this certain ways toward dark skin, but it's like, it's okay. Native Americans are basically white or whatever, But so when I went out with them, I was cool, but they ever saw me alone, I was a nigger respect, But but you're ripped away from everything. And you speak to other Native Americans, they're like, they speak to you, like, how is it over there? Like, you don't want to grow up over there. You're very lucky to grow up in Jersey, because not a lot of Native Americans are in Jersey, but they're, here and there, it's weird, you walk around. They come up to you, you're native, It's like, how do you know this? It's just like they just know. It's like weird. And then you have anthropologists, it's like weird. You're native. It's like, they get this towel. It's so weird. You get this unmistakable. You go into clubs and like, you have this unmistakable look, you just can't hide. Bone structure and everything. And they want it to be Asian, they want it to be Hindu, they want it to be external, but what you look like is Native American and native to the greatest country in the world, and it fills you with immense pride that no one can take away. I'm getting quotes to go into Warsaw. If I go to Warsaw, I need to have the whole trip planned down, funded, and in wartime an operation to pull out the hardware of my leg. I guess I gotta receive a sniper rifle somewhere in Germany, Warsaw, or Berlin. They still have it, and all that gear. I'll probably be on crutches, and I'll heal up as I'm going in. But I just want to see what it is if I go in. I have to make sure everything's situated over here. So I know they're giving away crypto or whatever. So and I feel if I'm going to do business in Ukraine, I should at least fight for Ukraine. You know, if I'm going to come in and you know, make sure if I do real estate and everything in Ukraine, help rebuild it. I should at least kill a few Nazi Russians, right? Or at least help build it, you know, fight for it. But I keep getting quotes. Keeps going down. But I need to be funded. If I go in, I had to clear it with like whatever I got to clear it with, right? The consulate and all that other stuff. Beat up with good people. That's the whole thing too. I want to make sure that other Americans and or whatever else, so they, you know, it's not just a simple thing of people just getting up and leaving. I think you need to organize every step of it. You know what I mean? Okay, so let's get the most up-to-date thing of Ukraine. So probably the easiest thing. Here we go. Maps right now. But this right here, this is currently happening. Go look at it for a second. Okay. Now we have this right here. So I'm gonna delete MS Paint. As they come in. Then we have the new map coming in, not this one. Have this map. Oh, okay, I gotta save it as a PNG. Save it as a PNG. There we go. Now we got it. Go back over here. Get a little bit more up to date. So we want to view it. Oh, you know what? No wonder why it's so small. I got the small one. Then we're going to go to the actual file, more details. Big one. Save as. A little bit more higher quality, you know. Like this one. And I get the high resolution one. There we go. So this is this, yeah. Oh, wrong one. There we go. So we'll start it over here. Get our window situated. So what I was thinking, you got Warsaw. Over here. Somewhere over here. I don't know exactly where it is. And you know, somewhere in that area over here, but it, you know, it's point being it's really close to Belarusian border. Somewhere off the map. And if everything could be stopped in Ukraine, Warsaw will be protected, Poland will be protected. So everything has to be done on the fire, under contested, under not perfect conditions, you know? So you need to have staging areas in here where right now, for all intents and purposes, it's out of the fighting. And you know, have water, that kind of thing. But I'm thinking even deeper into you know, more complex war equipment. I don't want to get into it, but armored vehicles, aircraft, that kind of thing here. So we got to stop thinking like we're not going to give Ukraine an air force. We are, and we need to. It's just there's no argument why Ukraine cannot get an air force. You know, we need to make an air force for them. Some fashion of air force. So in here, so obviously, step one, right? Is that what they say? Still say that's step one. Find people that agree that you need an air force, right? Because you're busy fighting, and you need to have those people make contact with people that could get you those planes. Already, UAE's paying for certain planes, but there's so many countries that are not in NATO that you need to reach out to, like here and there, you know, and have it staged out in Poland. So get on the phone, Poland, like, okay, are you okay with planes coming in, you know, aircraft, you know, a lot of ground attack aircraft, as we see. You don't see so many dogfights, you know. You need to have control of the air. You know, you people's like, oh, no fly zone. Fuck that shit. Fuck no fly zone. You need to have air dominance. Complete air dominance, air power, control of the skies. Not only do you control any attack aircraft, you could attack on the ground, you know what I'm saying? And plus you have the Iron Dome, whatever, you know what I'm saying? So don't think just no fly zone. Think air dominance. How you get air dominance. It's not just, oh, you're reacting. Okay, stop what's happening. Oh, you know, we're, you know, saying, like, please, you know, saying, do something for us, you know, I'm talking about stop all this mayhem. Like, no, motherfucker. Not only gonna stop what's happening, I'm gonna reverse the tables on you, you know, flip the script or whatever, and I'm gonna have those, because what they're sending out, honestly, is being shot down like crazy, and that's a benefit because that things are being attrited down. You're making it even easier for the few aircraft that you do have. And then first thing you do is get the anti-missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, the Iron Dome, and you start it out here, where there's no fighting. Well, less. So this is the region where you want to have like the netting and stuff like that, and you want to spread out, you know, your supplies, you know, because what you need for an air force, right? What is in it? You need planes, obviously. You need the pilots, obviously, but you need the ammo for those attack aircraft. You need the aircraft fuel for that. You know, support people for that, the mechanics and all that other stuff. Um, so you want to get that infrastructure set up already in this area, because what's the point of having a plane if they can't take off or whatever? So you want to make sure there's places that they could take off. And to me, I think the best thing would be VTOL aircraft, Harriers, and that type of thing. Helicopters, whatever, that could take off from very short runways and that kind of thing. And you could hide it away. You could hide. You don't put all the fuel in one place. You don't put all the ammo in one place. You just scatter it out, and then um, have the plane, camouflaged over. If there's any mines in that area. Right here. You want to have staging areas in here. Where they can't get to it, like, of course, water, um, ammo, food, and all that kind of thing. These white circles right here. They're out of the fighting zone. And before, if you protect Ukraine, you could stop everything coming into Warsaw. But that's where you also want to say, okay, Poland, is it okay we put planes in these staging areas so they're safe? Because what you want to do is mount up and build up a force before you put it into Ukraine. You want to put planes into Ukraine and have them off, but honestly, you're gonna have the infrastructure and support for like one type of plane. So those are the planes you want to filter into Ukraine initially, because the ones they're already prepared for, right? They're already being aggressive, and you make sure you get control of this area first. Of course, they're gonna make sorties out into all different regions of Ukraine or whatever, but here's if you want to build up and consolidate force, armored vehicles and airplanes and everything. And so as that aircraft infrastructure is built up, because everybody's like, oh, well, where's an Air Force going to come from? Well, step one, motherfuckers. Think about step one. Already think they're going to get an Air Force. Already think they're going to get air power. How do we get that? That's the goal. Air dominance. How do we get that? First thing is, so obviously we need planes. But what else do we need besides planes? What about on the ground? Make sure that's already set up. You know what I'm talking about? So, or you was already buying planes, whatever. Now you want to put up planes and not have them shot down, right? So that's already good. So you want to saturate all of Ukraine with Stinger missiles, right? So they're already taking down what they could take down with Stinger missiles. You know what I'm talking about? Now you move in the Iron Domes. Now the Iron Dome, anti-aircraft, anti-missiles are already taking down what they could take down. So you, next stage, saturate everything Ukraine with Stinger missiles and anti-aircraft missiles. Saturated the whole thing. So as soon as you have that, then you want to move in the Iron Dome type things, like this, to shoot down anything. This is the higher level. Now you increase the more planes are coming in, so more sorties you can have. So now not only can you shoot down theirs, and you already triggered what's there, it's safer for those few planes you do get up to make sorties, because they're already guarded by Stinger missiles. They're guarded by anti-aircraft missiles, and hopefully you can get some anti-missile missiles also, around Kyiv and, stationed outside. And it all has to be done under fire, so, and people that could walk it back so it doesn't get captured and everything. So, and where are you going to have all the time needs to be spent where the lane is to be taught in this region, how to use that material, that equipment. Just keep walking it in. Is growing this area, anti-missile area. You keep just walking it, talk about your air dominance over to all of Ukraine. Moldavia gets involved in all that stuff. Growing it. So you saturate all Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft capability, anti-missile capability, the Iron Dome. And you keep building up your aircraft, because you just don't want to use one here and have it shot down. You're waiting for the hammer to drop when Russia plays their final card. And so you want to have all that aircraft staged up as protected as you could get it, and with that, the ground crews and all that ammo ready to go as much as possible for that hammer to drop. Because you're delaying. You got to train. You got to teach these people how to use it for that final push, whatever that final push is, And Belarus goes after Warsaw, goes after the Baltic states and pushes down floods over the border. And I'm pretty sure they're going to take care of Ukraine first, but it could end. It began here, it will end here. So my thinking is that Belarus will eventually flood over the border, and the reserves will come in, whatever those reserves are. Typically, I say typically it's a bodyguard, the elite units, but I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what's there. But Russia is going to try to figure out the logistical issues. Obviously, I don't know if they can, so pull up everything. But you got to find people that could get the planes. You know what I'm talking about? Don't even think like you don't need an Air Force. You need an Air Force. You know what I'm talking about? How you just, you know what I'm saying? If NATO doesn't want to do it, be like, okay, fine, we could do it ourselves. Gives a tool so we get not only we can make a no-fly zone, we can have total air dominance. I could guarantee you Ukraine could get total air dominance. And right now, planes can't even really fly too well. You know what I'm talking about? It's just like, even like the ground attacked, heavily armored one, you just shoot enough missiles at it. That's what I would do. Like, be like, hey, to your brother, cousin, uncle, whatever, you both have Stinger missiles, fire both at the same time. You know what I mean? Because if you missed and the other one you do, you know what I'm talking about? It's just like those things are just too heavily armored. It'll take it down. I don't fucking know. But you can see a bunch of missiles go up and still flying or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I don't want to get specific details. Whatever works, and keep doing it. Don't change it. If it's not broken, don't fix it, right? But like I said, we have systems that are aged in storage or whatever, and we need to use the War Production Act now to put out our best ones, right? So the ones we have in storage won't make a difference if we give to Ukraine, and that's what every country needs to do. Put their War Production Act into practice, so you built the best, latest stuff, right? That way, your antiquated stuff, your antiquated Iron Dome stuff, you could give it to Ukraine. So something is better than nothing, right? So give Ukraine something, because that something is better than no air power. That something Iron Dome is better than no Iron Dome. You know what I'm talking about? If it could fight and kill, give it to them. You know what I'm saying? But what they already know how to use, let them put up. You know what I'm talking about? So as quickly as possible, be as effective as possible. And that's how you do that. Because you're trying to build up a force ready to counterattack. You have to do that. It doesn't come naturally. Because it's expected they could reach up to NIP. But this region is going to hold out, And I'm pretty sure they're going to be pushed back. And they already are. Or they're already pushing back, yeah. And I'm pretty sure once these people, you got to release some of these people in Kyiv that know what they're doing down into these cities. So they could do the exact same thing. Or actually FaceTime when I talk about release these people. Modern day age, right? So constant communication. And get the tools and materials. Whatever happened with this, it happens down here and over here. Odessa needs to be made into a fortress. Push those defenses out as much as possible. That road just needs to be impassable. Impassable, and all the surrounding area into the woods, not just the road, but the mud and all the way up into the trees, I'm talking about, so they can't, and then successive barricades coming into Odessa. Moldavia, what has an army of 6,000. Transylvania has an army of 10,000. They say that plus whatever's there is a few thousand. 2,000 are there. I don't know what the numbers are, but you could bolster that they need to highly mobilize now. And honestly, attack right in the center, or you could do what happened at Dudeburg, cut it off into threes. I have two of these right here, and then you handle each one in turn, and you just flank it. So you know they're not going to be reinforced, right? So you cut it off, and then you bulk your force right here, and you just push all the way down. Before they're able to link up and they have free passage, and then they can't launch attacks into Moldavia. And then you're coordinating with Ukraine. You know, I'm talking about like you both of your countries know like are moving as one. You know, Georgia, all the non-aligned countries, Moldavia, Ukraine. You know, I'm talking about so unity. You know, it's a lot stronger than because they want to divide you. Don't get divided. You know? Because you already saw the war plans from Lutsenko. They want to move it down to Moldavia and keep training, keep going through your drills, and then if they get to Odessa, I think that's the time to act. As soon as they get in the outskirts of Odessa, you don't know how long it's going to take Transylvania to conquer it or regain control of it. And it's already your territory already, you know. So you know what I'm saying. So, and that's what another thing I was thinking. So all these Russian soldiers that are in here, all those Russian soldiers, right? They're going to be prisoner of war. So we need to take that and these are small armies. And that's a lot of resources to guard these people. So we need to find out a way. All these prisoners of war. Held somewhere else. You know, I don't know if so we got to figure it out. So we take that resources, that burden, so they can't be put into the fight, you know. So they're just taken out. Find a country that's not part of NATO. Get all the prisoners of wars out. So now they could so the army that's there could focus on fighting than guarding people. You know what I mean? So it's going to stack up. So everything we can to remove that burden from them. You know, so we're the ones getting the airplanes for them. You know, we're the ones on the phone. We got an airplane down there in Chile, Argentina. You know, what do you got? You know, Brazil, that kind of thing. Like this one plane, you know, and they stage it in Poland or whatever, fly it up. You know, whatever it is, you know, helicopters and stuff like that. So you just keep building, and be like, oh, okay, well, are you prepared to receive this type of aircraft, Ukraine? Okay, we'll give that to you now to put up because now you had a fuel for that, the ground crew, because it needs maintenance and all this other shit. And then you have all that other war equipment, you're training it where it's safe or whatever, you know. It's not being destroyed because you're waiting for that major push to happen. and you're already going to do your counterattack, and you're going to provoke them to put their final blow in. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to provoke them to play their final hand, and you got to make sure it's their final hand. You know what I'm saying? So you're pushing them back. They're going to figure out the logistics, or yes, no, maybe so, whatever. And so you're pushing them back, like, fuck, we got to do everything we can to Ukraine. And boom, they just do everything. And that's when you're already built up your equipment, your armor, your logistics, whatever. Because what did Persians say? Uh, something to the effect like, weapons win battles, or aggression wins battles, but logistics wins wars. You know what I'm talking about? Because you got people willing to fight, but if they don't have what they need to fight, you're handcuffing them. You know what I mean? And you're making them poke with their fingers. You know, so don't make them poke with their fingers. Make them use their fist, everything they have, their mind, their body, everything they have, their whole soul. You know what I'm saying? Don't handcuff the people, man. So give them planes any way you can. I know it's a legal thing. You know, talking about it. It's definitely a political thing, but figure out, get an army of lawyers to figure out how can we give them aircraft? How can we give them an Iron Dome? How does this work? You know, what do you have that we could give the Iron Dome? You know, like, what is the process to do it? What is the logistics to do it? That's when you need to take that off the Ukrainians' hand, you know, while they're focusing on Kyiv or whatever, you know. They got enough issues. Now they got to, while bombs are dropping, they got to do cyber attacks. They got to do this. They got to do that. You know what I mean? It's like, what the fuck, dude? It's like, well, they're human beings, you know what I mean? Like, so we got to take that responsibility off of them and give them an Air Force. I mean, it's just how it is, what needs to be done. We can't do a no-fly zone. Good. You made your political statement. The Russian supporters get to stay no-fly zone. Good. Argument's done. Now give them an Air Force so they have total air dominance. All right? Stop that argument with no-fly zone, all right? Stop it. Give them a fucking Air Force so they have total air dominance. Boom. All right? Because they're doing it very effectively now. Build up that Air Force. For the reserves come in, whatever that is. And it takes a little bit of strength of the Ukrainian people to hold back. But you need to learn it and make it as effective as possible before you employ it, because you don't know what's coming. So make it as effective as possible, your Air Force and your armored vehicles, and build it up and stage it up until you absolutely know that this is their final hand that they're playing. And unfortunately, you know, you got to hold them off until that happens, provoke it to get it come in. And or just completely annihilate the army that's there. So you got two things, you know. That's one way. I'm not saying that's the best way. That's what I'm currently thinking in Hawaii. Out of the fight. You know, I'm over here. I'm out of everything. You know, I'm talking about what you think over there might be a thing. As it comes in, fly it up. But I guess maybe 80-20 rule. 20% you use that you know how to use, and stack up 80%. You know, or you want to have something. You know, you don't want to risk annihilation. Have something there for that final hand. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. That's the best thing I got. Put up 20% with all aircraft you come in. Put up that Iron Dome as fast as possible. Saturate all of Ukraine with Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft missiles. So first step, saturate all of Ukraine with as much Stinger missiles as possible. Keep doing that. It's no brainer. Then all of our antiquated Iron Dome stuff, move it into Ukraine. Defense production of all our countries, doing all of our stuff that's effective, so they can at least shoot down some of the cruise missiles, whatever, and aircraft and everything, right? And just keep walking as much that Iron Dome across Ukraine. While you're doing, as you're saturating it, that Iron Dome is increasing. You build up that air power, more aircraft, and you're launching more aircraft. That you could be able to be effective and come back and keep doing sorties or whatever. And you have your reserve force, because they have the reserve force. You gotta have, and that those armored vehicles and aircraft that you're using, you're learning how to deal with them. You know what I'm talking about? So when your forces are employed, they're not going at, they don't know what to do. They're just there and they're a target or whatever. That 20% is figuring out how to be most effective in this battle that's happening right now. But okay, we know what to do. This is how you go about it, So when they all come in, you just flower it through them like a Grim Reaper. When their final hand's played. That's the point. All right. And if you're demonstrating Russia, slow them down. Non-violent stuff. Choose life over death. I think that's a good mentality, and don't let it just be words. Just let it sink into your whole being. A civility, and you're just a very happier person. No one could rip down, You're always gearing towards that equality, towards that happiness, towards that, and especially the more violent it becomes. All right. I'm telling you right now about the Air Force. It's a talking point in politics. They want to say no fly zone, so NATO will not get involved. We're not trying to provoke a nuclear war. You know what I'm talking about? That's where they're important to state. But you could also give them Air Force without provoking a nuclear from non-NATO countries and entities or whatever. No, be wholly Ukrainian. We know they need it. Let's get it done. That's what does that look like? Them getting in that Air Force. So, okay. But that's when I hear it. It's like, why are you asking for a no-fly zone? I get that. But, I mean, obviously you want to stop all the bombs and everything, but when you can get air dominance, that should be the goal, that's who's going to win the battle, And even if you don't get air dominance, you're probably going to win anyways, But that's not the point. You're trying to end it as quick as possible. So that plays into it. How do you end it as quick as possible? But you got to also think, like, what if you apply everything you have now, what do you have in reserve, just in case, So, and if you have a reserve, you push them back to the borders, then whatever is staged in that aircraft and armored vehicles can now push up to Minsk. There you go. It's not only. So yeah, that's my thinking. I don't know. That's just my thinking. I don't know. It will probably adjust as things progress or whatever. I had to make a couple of corrections and everything, but yeah. Yeah, I do so many things at once. All right, I'm out. Good. You got to do what you got to do. You get it done as quick as possible. All right. Glory to Ukraine. Peace.